Let's get underway. Welcome to Planning and Housing Committee meeting number 21. It's a lucky number. It is 21. I'll let others explain the numerology. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured this land and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. Kelly, could I ask for a roll call, please?
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor Dudas.
I'm here.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Present.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Lowe. Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Gower.
Here.
Chair, you have quorum.
Thank you. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 7.1 to 7.3 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if Council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on February 7th, 2024, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. No declarations of interest were filed today. Are there any? See none. Confirmation of minutes. Are the minutes of the Planning and Housing Committee meeting 20 confirmed? Thank you. Responses to inquiries. We've received a response to the inquiry. Does the city have a 15-year land supply to meet housing targets? On to the substantive agenda. We're going to receive a presentation this morning. I'm very excited about this on the 3D digital twin project. I hope people look forward to that. Postponements and deferrals. The motion, item 6.1 by Vice Chair Gower with respect to 1835 Stittsville Main Street. Vice Chair Gower, did you have?
Yes, I'm going to withdraw that motion for now. There was a very productive meeting between the parties and staff, and they are working on a potential solution. So it may come back at a later date in a different form, but for now, I'm happy to withdraw it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Item 7.1 is with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment for 780 Baseline Road. We are obviously going to hold that one. The bylaw amendment for 16 Edgewater Street. There is one public delegation who is registered to speak. Are they in attendance? So we're going to hold that one. The zoning bylaw amendment at 991 Carling Avenue. Did any members wish to hold that one? There are no presentation, no delegations, or correspondence. We have received correspondence from the Civic Hospital Neighborhood Association. Seeing no desire to hold that one, Christine with Q9 Planning and Design, if the committee is prepared to carry this, do you still wish to speak?
No, I do not, Chair Leeper.
Thank you, Christine. Is that item carried? Thank you. The omnibus amendments, Q1 2024. We don't have a presentation on that, no delegations, and we haven't received correspondence. Did any members wish to hold that one? Nope. Is that item carried? Carried, thank you. Just noting that there is a status update on the agenda for the Planning and Housing Committee increase in motions. And we'll get to the rest of it later. So let's go back to the top of the agenda with our first item on the agenda, the 3D digital twin project. We need to, oh, sorry. Thank you, Kelly. We need to add this one to the agenda to receive the presentation. So there is a procedural motion. Vice Chair?
Be it resolved that the Planning and Housing Committee waive the rules of procedure to receive the presentation from Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department, Right-of-Way, Heritage, and Urban Design regarding progress on the 3D digital twin project and a live demonstration at today's meeting, and dispense with the requirement to provide a separate written report on this presentation.
Is that carried?
Carried.
Thank you. To the team, could you introduce yourselves and give us the presentation? We're in your hands.
Thank you, Chair, and for the opportunity to come to present to you on the digital twin. My name is Randall Roger, and I manage the geospatial team here at the City of Ottawa. And to my right is JF Dion, who's a geospatial strategist on my team, and Esther Perron, who's also a geospatial strategist. So I'll move to the next slide here. It's not showing up, but so the geospatial team is embedded, so one more slide, I apologize for that, yeah, okay. So the geospatial team is embedded within Planning, Real Estate, Economic Development. You don't often see us at committee, but you are very familiar with our work. We do everything from the aerial acquisition program to the zoning location maps. I'll go to the next slide here. So let's get to the heart of the matter. What is a digital twin? You can find many definitions of a digital twin, but for us, it's a 3D geospatial model of Ottawa. Why are we building this? There's two main drivers. One is in support of developing the new consolidated zoning bylaw. The other one was for the official plan, where we received direction to provide better numerical and visual analysis for all projects. And I want you to think about that. What does that mean? And for us, there's kind of three pillars to that. It's about big data. So there's lots of information that goes into these types of projects. It's data science, so it's having the tools and the technology to work with that data and the complexity of information, because cities are very complex systems. And then the power of location. So where are things happening? In a municipality, that's often the first question we ask, where is that occurring? And so we're bringing that all together in a visual and immersive environment that's more intuitive to us as humans. We deal in a 3D environment. We don't see things often in 2D, even though they're presented to us often that way at committees and council. So I'll flip to the next slide. And I think it's very important. I wanted to share with you about our aerial acquisition program and reality capture and data intelligence. So that provides the foundation for this system. We need a good surface for our digital twin because we place stuff on that surface, above and below. What's below, that's our utilities. And my team also manages the composite utility program here at the City of Ottawa. So what's encompassed in that aerial acquisition program, which I wanted to thank Council for continuing to fund that program, that's drones, aerial photography, LiDAR, and satellite imagery. We're bringing big volumes of data together and processing that for use in the digital twin and for infrastructure, capital construction, and even in the Office of Emergency Management. One of the places that we want to head with the acquisition program this summer is we're looking at mobile collection. Most people are familiar with Google Maps. Google Maps is not an intelligent way to work with that data. By adding LiDAR, we can then begin to measure and do analytics and pull features out like cracks in the road automatically. So our team is very happy to have the machines do the work for us because it's such large volumes of data. Yeah, next slide. Sorry, thank you. So I wanted to kind of focus, obviously this is the planning committee, and we wanted to bring to you some of the ideas of how we're going to see the changes. It's a very transformational change in how not only we work, but the people that we collaborate work and deal with that information. It's very difficult to see up here, and even if you could see it clearly, it's a jumble of numbers. And when you look at that, it takes work to understand what that means. So that's how we derive the heights. And as humans, it's very tough for us to decipher the frontage, the setbacks, the side yard, adjacent uses. So let's have the computer do that for us. So we breathe life into that, and we present it, which is the image on the right, in 3D. So it becomes intuitive what we're dealing with in terms of heights of what we're proposing in our visionary document and through the new zoning bylaw, what provides the teeth to see how that grows. So we need to understand the current situation, what's our density, to what we're proposing around the hubs, corridors, and Main Street. So it's very human focused, so we have that realism and we see things in context. So not only can I see table 7, but I can see that corresponding secondary plan in that area. So bringing that information out of those policy documents, putting it into an environment where I can see and compare it and understand how it is in the real world, that's the beauty and the power of the digital twin. Next slide. The next slide is part of our new terms of reference. So we're asking developers, and I believe it's 5 stories and above, to provide their building information models. When you lay that in the twin, it's now horizontally and vertically accurate. So it's on that surface. So I know exactly the height, and I can show the parking and the units above, and I can attach metrics to that model. So I can do floor space indexes. But some of the stuff becomes really intuitive. Shadow analysis, those tools are built in. So you're speeding up and helping in the development review process by having the digital twin model available for staff. And that's our goal, is making it available to them. And then you can layer on IoT, so smart sensors, so the buildings can report back. So now I am proactive in my planning versus reactive. It could be a sensor on the river, so I know how fast the river's rising for flooding. Lots of good applications for this. If we flip to the next slide. The digital twin is about collaboration. So while it has great impact for planning, it's helpful across the city. And I tried to provide a few examples here for you to see how we're providing mobile tools for inspectors to go out into the field, working with our partners in public health on heat islands mapping to slope stability around Bilberry Creek. So that's an example of where we put a drone out to collect high detail that can penetrate the coverage. And so we get an excellent idea of the surface and area where there is slope stability issues. So right across the board from EOC to operations. And I threw in a little one there on the bottom left where we're going out and scanning the salt domes. I'm sure all of us appreciate not slipping on the sidewalks, and the crews are doing great work in there. So I just wanted to give you the idea. It's about collaboration, and it helps everybody across the city. And I'll go to the next slide. So this is a really simplified roadmap. Where we are is in the middle. We're working with our colleagues in IT. We're testing Portal. That's the back-end servers that allow this data to be pushed out to staff. So we're hoping that that will be up and running, the testing phase, and we can begin to load our data into this environment. We haven't been waiting for that environment. We've been using it, as I said, to help build the new zoning bylaw, track OP policies, tree canopies. But that's where we're going with this. So we'll release, hopefully later this year, internal tools for staff in development review, eventually a public-facing interface for engagement and improving transparency, and then obviously the integration of the approved new zoning bylaw. So that's where we are and where we're going. And I'll just switch to the next slide here. So I just wanted to, before I pass things over to my colleague JF, I just wanted to just briefly mention that if we had some virtual reality headsets, I could put you into this 3D environment now. We have that capability and it's fully supported here. But we're going to do the next best thing. JF is going to provide you a live demo, and you can see the big data, the data science, the power of location, providing you with better visual and numerical analysis. So without further ado, I will pass it over to JF, who's, you know, it's a live demo, so we've got our fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll see it on the screen here shortly.
Thank you, Randall. So you'll probably recognize some of the tools that are on the screen. We're using the same backend as our existing GIS solution. This is a full 3D immersive visualization of our city. Whether you're in Constance Bay, Navan, or downtown, you'll get the same level of detail on each of these buildings. They're all attributed, have all the information connected to them, and we can build, push information directly to them, and I'll show you a few examples. I'm gonna have to run through this. Here's our dense 3D mesh a la Google, generated from our 3D imagery that we're now collecting yearly at 6 centimeters. And so this very defined environment is covering all of our urban area from Richmond to Cumberland to Stittsville. One of the main focus for the initial steps is to verticalize all of our existing regulations, for example, sight lines to Parliament Hill and maximum height for all of our downtown core. And this as a internal team work change, we're now creating all of our zoning schedule in 3D. So it's a big change management also on the production side of our data. We're actually creating data in 3D now, which is really exciting. Existing zoning can now also be seen in 3D. This is our existing zoning bylaw, although I'm pulling it from our existing infrastructure, but making it in 3D, giving it some depth and, very, you can zoom anywhere to anywhere and see things from a completely different perspective. We're pushing the data to all of our building across the city. Here's year built, but we can also push all of our existing studies. Here's an example of the 15-minute neighborhood, and you can quickly see where we might have some service deserts in some of the harder to get street neighborhoods. Procedural modeling, here's table 7 in an area of the city where we can quickly, from tables, create setbacks, height volumes, create how much space we can generate from each of these designation. And these tables are very variable, so we can create different podiums, different angles. And so this is where we're going to do a lot of work in the next couple of months with draft 1 coming out and working with our partners to provide them with advanced analytic tools. We can create designs and concept plans in massing and then bring them back all into that environment where we can quickly create visualization. All of these elevations are connected to space use types that are connected to metrics. And what we can do, I'll show you a quick example, is we can create some dashboards and some scenarios from a small concept to a full build-out plan. And this is obviously not something that is current, it's in our testing phase, but we're creating those metrics, and those metrics can be passed around, modified, adjusted to a simple building or to the complete neighborhood. Very, very powerful tool. Got to run here. Talking about reality capture, Bank Street looking south from Riverside. What if? So we scan the city, the street for about 4 kilometers. We classified the data, and what if we took the power lines out? And so this is a very powerful way of sharing visuals to clients, partners, and in the future, our constituents. But also what we can do with that data collection is classify and extract assets and then start be able to inspect, calculate distances, clearances, offsets, in our right of way and do the work from our desktop, which also is a great for carbon emission control. Development review, we talked about BIM models. We can import BIM models in our 3D model, do some visualization, calculation, shadow analysis, clipping, 3D aspect, sight lines. We can go underground, visualize if we have infrastructure in the way. And actually, we loaded the geological, geotechnical boreholes that should show up. Here we go. We got one right here all of the data that's being collected right now, either through existing projects, new projects, or going into the new geotechnical database. And those are imported directly in the twin. We can go into our underground infrastructure. So if this loads quickly, we should be in Rideau Station in 3, 2, 1. Still waiting. I'll just pass this one, I guess. Okay, let's try again. I knew there would be a hiccup. Yeah, so sorry about that. It just won't show up today. All right. So this is it, be able to see the city at scale from every location. It will over the years become a better, powerful tool. We're working on getting better data, creating better data, so we're going as high resolution as possible. Super excited. We've been showing this to a lot of people and we're getting a lot of praise. So thank you for your time.
That's it? That's it, as if, eh? Yeah. I'm sorry, I just need to pull up my speakers. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think the team's excitement is evident, and I'm certainly hearing a lot from the committee, just in terms of some excitement, even as you're presenting. Councillor Curry.
Thank you very much. I was really waiting for this presentation. It's so exciting. You guys do amazing work, and this is the future for sure. I have two questions, somewhat of like Debbie Downer questions, but one of them is in terms of security and who has access to all of this intimate data. So that's my first question. My second question is, we always talk about difference between outputs and outcomes, and you thanked the council for funding this, an absolutely smart plan for us to fund it. At the end of the day, where do we see the outcome being increased savings for the city and or developers in terms of saving money, not having to put in so many applications because all that information is already known? And the third question to that is, how closely do you work with the economic development staff in terms of translating the possibilities here into real dollars?
Okay, so I'll answer, Chair, thank you, sorry for that. So security is definitely a concern with this information. And so we were showing you a test environment. So it will be internal only, and that's what's being developed, a portal. And always, you look at the data sets that you have, and we've been dealing with data for many, many years, myself over 30 years here at the city. And so it depends on your job, what information you can see, and you have the information access. So that could be TerraNet, which there's data agreements in place, assessment information. So that stuff wouldn't be going out to the public, but there is information that's now available public, like they're submitting the plans, right, for development. So we would follow those rules, and that can always be revisited based on the direction that we receive from council and others. So security is obviously part of that build out. Did you want to, sorry, David might want.
Yeah, Chair, I also want to point out just the fundamental paradigm shift this is going to do for policy, regulation, scenario development, and development planning as we go forward. And that has huge ramifications for how we develop policy. Think about if we'd had this tool during the official plan and the ability to work through and really understand what these policies mean when you see them actually implemented and actually on the ground, and be able to communicate that back to the public and also to yourselves to understand as we flow these things through. So that's very powerful in itself in speeding up that communications process. The big thing that we're doing with Randall's team, which is very exciting, is we are taking that huge cumbersome zoning bylaw, which is handwritten and really tends to be interpreted by hand, and digitizing it, putting it into a code that our colleagues over in GATS can in fact actually turn into basically almost computer code. That in itself will dramatically increase the ability for people to understand what it is that can be done, what the art of the possible is that can be done on each of their development sites. That is also in turn how we move to the ability to do, say, e-permitting, things like that. Now that we have a digitized code, we have a digital twin, we can put those things together. it advances and unlocks a whole series of other opportunities that then flow from this. So it's a very exciting thing that we're working forward. In terms of those economic opportunities, Councillor, there are significant opportunities to dramatically speed up the ability for us to approve developments going forward, to be able to realize and understand what a new application coming in might look like, so we can work more quickly with that applicant to get them moving forward to something that's going to be approved faster, and also just to be able to test and understand various scenarios as they go forward. So, you know, looking forward, this is one of those foundational things, and we're going to see what gets built on top of it afterwards over the coming years. But we are very excited in policy and planning about this.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, these things are always hard to estimate, right? So no one's here saying, oh, well, actually, this is going to save us $50 million. There's no number attached to this, right? There's the assumption that this will save us money. I think it will. I think it'll be fascinating to see how we're going to track to see what it does for us. You know, time is money, so if it saves a ton of time, then that's time. Does it save any positions? Does it save any need for a particular department? And not at all looking for job cuts. I'm just saying, how can we transition some people maybe over into other areas because there's less time required over here, retrain people for more work on digital twinning, if it's not necessary to be looking at the paper documents all the time. You know, so it'll be interesting to see how we track the benefits of this. And I'm not only looking for the financial ones. It's just that when you're on this working group, every single time a report comes to committee, you think about that, you know? So anyway, thank you very much. All very exciting.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Merci beaucoup à Jean-François qui vient de Anybody? On mute?
So speaker on it doesn't matter. Just hit me too.
Oh, it was me. Oh, there's-
Again.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. I wished it was someone else, but it was just me. So yes, so thank you very much for the presentation et merci à Jean-François qui vit à la Quartier Collège. Alors, ça me fait plaisir encore. Ça me fait souvenir d'un organisme qui s'appelait Milieu, qui étaient des gens en Ottawa, des jeunes dans 2017 qui ont prévu cette opportunité. And they did some work with the City of Guelph and others to try and use digital tools for public engagement on development files. And I am really curious to understand the intersection between this digital twinning service and what is now DevApps. You'll see I have an inquiry today asking about how we currently use our public notification system, which I think, as Councillor Curry is describing, or where she's curious, the public notification system as it exists is very manual. And so we may see an opportunity here to create new engagement strategies around development applications. Can you comment on some of the opportunities that you foresee for the public to interact with this tool on development applications, please?
Yeah, so the digital twin has the ability to be published public, and obviously, thank you, Chair. We need to ensure what information is going out and have that approval to do so. But this is a visual environment. The plans and information could be shared out so they can see the model, they could see it in context. If you think of the tool of GeoWattawa, which is, it's not as an intelligent an environment as this, but if we were to publish out the twin, you could see that building model as an example in context of the surrounding area. The tools are built in to do shadow analysis so you could see the impact for yourself. And we don't know what's of most important to each individual. We have general ideas, but they can cater their experience to better understand how that project impacts them on a personal level, which is also important. The economics as well, we can provide some metrics. That all needs to be sorted out. There's obviously the challenge of AODA, so it's difficult to get information out when it's a 2D map. What are the challenges when we're trying to provide a 3D map? But this environment is built for sharing and collaboration. And we're already leveraging open data right now, so we're pushing out a simplified version of all those buildings and our surface for developers to do their designs in context, so they can begin working in that environment to provide a better product when they come into planning. So they've already done some of that work themselves.
Thank you for that. I'll look forward to hearing the evolution of that. I'm sure there will be many people that would love to get their fingers on this and help you beta test it, right? I'm sure you'll have no shortage of nerds that are interested in it, including all the nerds sitting at this table, and you guys too. So I think my follow-up question might be, how how will this help us to, I think one of the challenges right now when we're planning our city is the ward definitions. So if I think of Merivale Road at Clyde, or Clyde and Maitland, or however you want to categorize that intersection, we actually have 3 councillors that live on that intersection. And so when we see planning applications, we actually see them somewhat independently. But now I think there's, over 15 planned major sites between our 3 wards concentrated around this intersection. Would there be an opportunity with this tool to level up the boundaries by which people can participate to map out not maybe ward-based, but some kind of user experience of land mass? The people that drive down Merivale Road are not necessarily thinking about, oh, if I've got an issue on this side, I got to call Councillor Devine, this side Councillor Brockington, or this side Councillor Johnson. But we unfortunately ask them then to do that. Could we imagine, an extra layer to this where we're asking for feedback on different neighborhoods or?
Chair, when we decided to go on this adventure of building the digital twin, we didn't segment things on wards. It's a citywide project, and that's always how we want to keep it going. Our group GATS also manages on the operational side the key mapping process, and so for us to insert that additional information of massing a simple 2D to 3D building in that future digital twin through the regular, development process is already in our books. So in the process of applying, getting things approved, you'll see a citywide massing of those future projects being built in the twin.
I'm really looking forward to that holistic approach of land use planning, so thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks, Chair. Congratulations. This looks like a tremendous amount of work. I think we're all really excited about it. And this is relatively new technology for Canadian municipalities, is that correct? I think Toronto may have also created a twin, but we're leaders in this space, right?
Chair, yes, we're definitely leaders in this space. We were very privileged to win an international award from Esri, a special achievement in GIS, and we also received the City Manager's Award of Distinction. And probably almost every week or month we get municipalities inviting us out to come and share our experience and how we did this build out. So yeah, it's very exciting.
Well, I'm so glad I asked that question because I think you deserve a lot of kudos. That's excellent work, and I'm glad that's out there. Congratulations again. I think the public engagement opportunities are really exciting, and this may be more of a question for David or Derek, but I'm wondering how this tool will be used to inform planning decisions. You talked about that a little bit, David, but I often say what works on paper doesn't necessarily work on practice, or when we're reviewing applications in isolation, we miss sort of that broader neighborhood context, which is why I'm a big fan of site visits and dragging staff out to the site. But this feels like it gives that context that is missing. So, for example, if we have a zoning bylaw amendment for an area that doesn't have, to change from commercial to residential zoning in an area where we can see is void of, that 15-minute neighborhood commercial component, would this tool be used to sort of make a case for that?
Chair, yes, I definitely do see that as being the path that we are going down as we go forward. When you look at what we generally produce for these public consultation activities, things like that, they're tough to read. They are, almost Terminator level kind of stuff. It's flat 2D stuff. That's not how people see the world. So the idea, and we do renderings and concepts and things like that, and we generally tend to be hand drawn and stuff like that. But this is the ability to really do and see and really get a sense of what's actually being proposed. If we go forward with future secondary plan initiatives, having this tool in our back pocket to the previous question allows for people to be able to turn on layers and understand what ifs and see how the policy actually might manifest itself in different ways. And that's going to be a really powerful tool as we go forward. Royce, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, Chair, just on a secondary plan example, so we're using this as sort of a test for Lincoln Fields, for example, and we're able to see, and so typically when we do a secondary plan, we look at the secondary plan area, but now we have the ability to look at beyond that secondary plan, and how does the proposed components in that area fit in with the rest of the neighborhood, and how that rest of the neighborhood might build up, and as Dave has suggested, what scenarios can we test? So we are sort of trying to find how we can use this as part of the public consultation and also part of the planning process as we move forward, using the secondary plans as an example.
Okay, great. So this will kind of become baked into the process, by which planners will do their work. This will be.
I think that's fair to say that we will definitely look at this. I don't know if it's going to be an absolute business rule. It's very much like another tool that planners will use, such as Geo-Ottawa. It would just be an automatic thing that people want to reference in order to use to help visualize change in an area.
Okay, thank you for that. Very exciting. My last question, a kind of a nerdy question. Do you need like a supercomputer to run this, or will anybody be able to sort of log on like Geo-Ottawa?
Yeah, the back-end data processing to create the model and work with it does require a significant computer, but pushing it out, it's web-based, and so if you have a computer that can handle the web-based, there's no special plugins. You can work with this information, and we're always trying to find ways to speed up that data, so there's ways to accelerate it when it's pushed out. So knowing who's going to be using it. If you're an engineering firm, you need the full detail and the richness of it, but we scale that information down in order for public engagement and to not tilt people's computers.
Awesome. Congrats again. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. So I share the general sentiment around the table. This is very exciting. Kudos on an amazing project. So I just want to ask you if you think this scenario is realistic, because as Councillor Johnson said, this would be a great public engagement opportunity. And I know I have very active planning committees within my community associations. And if they, and a lot of the important nuts and bolts discussion happens in the pre-consultation phase, right? So if they could sit down with the developer and with city staff and say, well, what happened if you, what would it look like if you raised the podium? What if you angled the building? What if we moved the setback? Like, is that something you anticipate we could do in real time and that residents could do? Because that would be incredibly cool. Because very often, you know, a perfect example, we have a really complex development that's going to be going in near Plant Community Center, the 1010 Somerset development. And I'm constantly hearing, well, what if you moved the school here and flipped it with the building? Or what if you put the tower behind there? And it's really hard to explain why this is, like, what that would do. And it would be so cool with the development if in real time we could move the Lego or the Tetris pieces around and they could say, oh yeah, you're right, okay, that would shadow the fields, you know? Do you anticipate that being a use that we could do in the future?
Chair, we've already started doing this type of exercise with some of the planners, thinking of large secondary planned visualization at pre-consultation. So we're starting to embed some of the technology already in some of our planners' hands. Yeah, anything else you want to add on this one?
Well, I think we're not the planner, so we're not involved in that step, but we're definitely building the tools to give them that capability. And I can envision that, yes, exactly that. That's the power of the digital twin, is that you can provide alternate scenarios, move things around, change your perspective, show the sun shadow analysis. So I think it has the ideal makings to allow that, and then it would be up to obviously planning and others to implement that.
That's amazing, because I think that's what we need, because the number of times I hear, well, why couldn't you do it that way? Or why can't you move that building? And if you can literally do it in the digital twin and see, then the road can't access the building. Like, it's just so real for people. So anyway, very excited about the potential for this. Thanks.
Chair, if I could just chime in real quickly. Of course, the digital twin would be to supplement the professional expertise of the team, and also, of course, with respect and with the it would have to be with the concurrence, of course, of the applicant's team, the developers, the architects and engineers would have to be involved. But certainly, we could see it as an opportunity for them to be working on some charrettes, some idea scenarios with a neighborhood going forward, with the understanding of all of the other pieces that are involved in a development application.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. It's quite enlightening, and Someone just reminded me, back in the day, we were actually very helpful with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities when it came to national inventories of infrastructure. And this was quite a while ago, and it was actually Alain Gauthier and the group here at the city that actually assisted in that. And I see this as the next evolution, is where we're a leader as a municipality, and having that ability to present to the federal body would be great when it's big tested and we're ready to roll. I think we want to show that leadership. I'm also very proud to see ArcGIS and Ezra gold standards when it comes to presentation layers, be able to retrieve those data sets and mash them in. There's no, that's the gold, is to be able to layer those data, to be able to capture the data and to present it that way. It takes a lot of energy, as mentioned, but it takes a lot of thought about how you layer. We have no custom code, but we do have connections, and we're using proven technology. We've gone down the road in the past where you try to just do a custom code, and it's not to a standard, and we get lost in the forest. But this product here is a very good product. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Chair, yes, we are leveraging the Esri Enterprise Agreement here at the City of Ottawa, and that's the backbone of this technology, which has been proven here at the city and basically across the world. I think I read somewhere that they have 350,000 users, so it is a gold standard for sure.
That's amazing. The fact that we could leverage that technology and create and brain all that into this mirroring model is very terrific, and I appreciate that. We use it for our snowplow tracking now as well. So the city is really getting on board with a proven product here, and I just want to thank you folks for coming out today.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. Lots of fun. It reminds me of SimCity, where my kids used to play, and I'm just waiting for Godzilla to come along and squish the buildings. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm wondering about the inputting and how it's done, because right now it seems like it's really tricky, and I'm thinking in terms of utilities under the ground, that there are just so many, and it doesn't seem to be well tracked at the moment. How are you inputting that information?
So we did a proof of, sorry, Chair, we did a proof of concept using our stormwater and water network, so that was the green piping. My team that manages the central registry, which is all the composite utility drawings, that stuff is collected in 2D, and often the 3D, the elevation or the depth, is not attached to that. So that's one of our challenges, to clean up that data set. But we do have that information. It's being published into GeoOttawa now, so we can take that existing published service, which means the data is like an electrical outlet. The data's there. We're just going to basically plug the digital twin into that, and that information then becomes available in the twin. So then you can see all the underground utilities. That's on our roadmap. There's cleanup that needs to be done. And it's the concept of now where we're putting mobile tools in the hands of others. So we're reaching out to our partners and other teams who are going out with accurate devices to collect the location of hydrants and meters, and so upgrading that information in the field rather than hiring extra staff to go and do that. It's part of their job to do that pickup.
It sounds like it's going to be a lengthy process to get that done, because it's not just water, it's hydro, it's all kinds of things. I had 2 instances where projects were delayed and changed because they didn't know about utilities under the ground, major projects. So I'm hoping, I'm really hoping that this won't happen in the future, i.e. we'll save money and time. One was a bridge that had to be redesigned because they didn't realize there was a utility where they were going to land the bridge. And the other was a sidewalk where they didn't realize there was utilities, so they couldn't build a sidewalk there. I'm hoping you can tell me that won't happen in the future, because it's a waste of time and it's a waste of money.
Chair, yes. Definitely a goal of this project is that you have all that information home run into one spot, so you're not digging for paper files or looking at other locations, that information is all here and part of the twin. And as I mentioned, it's the surface, things above, and below. And that's our goal, to have that information there and available so you don't miss anything. But there is a ton of information to deal with. So yeah, that would be definitely a goal for this project, is that we don't run into those situations, for sure.
That'd be great. Yeah, no, that it was real-time issues. I'm also asking about transportation and how that's integrated in. I mean, even OC Transpo perhaps could make use of this?
Chair, yes, we've already started doing some work with OC Transpo, one of which is really a fun project. We took some scanners and drones, and we digitized all the bus models in 3D. And the next step is to get the new GTFS RT real-time live stream and create one of the IoT live feed into the twin, so you'll see buses going in real time. Think about fleet, think about water meters. All of these IoT devices can now be fed into the twin, and we're basically blowing up all the silos in the city into one 3D environment where we can interact between, a main line just broke, are there buses coming in, and then have automated reporting. So it opens up a new environment, a new ecosystem, but this IoT real-time feed is the next step. And to answer your question from another past question, this is a long life project. It will never end. The digital twin is the new interface for mapping. We're still pulling all of the existing geospatial data that's stored into the Esri platform, but we're making it live and visually interactive in 3D and 4D, right? I didn't show you any of the sun moving around, and there's a lot of applications that are still to be shown on this tool. Thank you.
And so for transportation planning as well, like cycle lanes, et cetera, would be included. Okay, thank you very much.
Actually, Chair, just one last point.
Yeah.
I did the presentation at the Climate and Climate Change and Resiliency Committee, and they brought the question about creating new pathways for cycling. And I said, well, with our forestry data in the twin, with all our shadow analysis, we can propose optimized bike lanes where we have the most shadowed areas in the city. So there's a lot of things we can still develop from the data we're developing every day.
Actually, that's a good point about trees, because in developing and creating new infrastructure, just knowing underground, how it interferes with established trees. I'm always getting that, of course, when projects go forward. And it seems like that would be helpful, like to really understand how much room they need. Is that part of the consideration?
Chair, I can just add, we are presently reviewing the 2023-2024 canopy coverage with natural system. Okay. I'm not a forester, but we're working closely with the forestry, both in planning and public works, and our 3D mobile capture program, where we'll collect all these 3D points, will give us a real detailed look of where our tree canopy is and the condition of it.
And how to protect it.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Derouz.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. This is very exciting, and congratulations. It's a very important project, the digital twin, and I know that you're the lead in the Canadian municipality. My question will be, is that something it be used also in rural area? Are we expanding it to our rural area, or this is just going to be in urban and suburb?
Chair, as I explained earlier in my presentation, the 3D schematic models cover every single square kilometer of the city. We try to get as much detail on the built information as possible. Although, obviously, the aerial capture program that was revisited this year will have yearly collection of the high-resolution imagery across the urban, and still some high-resolution yearly. So you'll get, even in rural areas, a benefit of this revised acquisition program. In areas where there are special interests, we can acquire more data and create those localized 3D models very specifically. The mobile capture program will cover every kilometer, or we hope will cover every kilometer, although this year we're just planning to do the urban area. Next year we'll want to plan to do all of the suburban and rural areas. So it will come in time. Every area of the city will be covered.
Yeah, no, I thank you. I really appreciate it because it will help with our secondary plan and planning in the rural villages, of course. But also, I want to capture that we also have a lots of municipal drain, and it's good to have a view on them. So we don't, sometimes there is a lots of imaging will be able to help us from a mapping perspective to see if there is blockage or anything. So that's basically why I'm just trying to highlight that. But thank you very much. I'm really excited about that, and I appreciate all the work that's been done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Deleuze, and thank you for joining us today. I don't see any other questions from members. If I may just pose one of my own, the emphasis in the presentation was on structures, so building heights and building envelopes. You showed some road widths, some right-of-ways. Are those as flexibly modeled in the digital twin as buildings? So can you take roads and show widths with lanes, or is that down the road?
Our acquisition, Chair, sorry, our acquisition program also includes the mapping at 1,000 and 5,000 scale. Typically in our existing Geo-Ottawa services, we make use of center lines. The digital twin will make full use of the exact right-of-way from sidewalk or curb to curb, including the 3D data. So to answer another question, for example, streams and waterways, those have typically been done in 2D. We're now going to verticalize those and create slopes and flow directions in the twin, and those will obviously go into our registry where we do have culverts, and yes, those will be all modeled in 3D from our central registry and our acquisition program.
I was just going to add, yeah, you can provide alternate scenarios to the road, to the streetscape. We can scan existing items like benches and have photorealistic editions of what it would look like in the future based on what is being proposed to change in development. So that capability to see what was there in the past, so we could bring back past buildings that have been demolished, we could show the future, and then what we're planning out. And so anything that's there, we can recreate in a 3D model for what we're proposing, and also to track and predict as well as we move forward.
So you could show a cycling lane on a street, a hypothetical cycling lane, and then demonstrate what the interaction would be with a sightline interference with a tree, for example.
Exactly, a photorealistic edition of that, and we can, as I mentioned, you could put the virtual headset and we could place you on that street so you could sit there and look and see exactly what that transformation would be that we're proposing to take place.
How sophisticated do you intend the tools to be that would be made available to the general public?
I think you have to, it's probably in phases. Even some of my staff were retraining to understand how to work in that environment. So you want to be easy enough to work with and intuitive. And I think we see that now. People are familiar with Google Maps. They're familiar with working in that environment. Not everybody, of course, but it's broadening. So the digital divide is reducing. So most people understand how to work with this, but you still need tools that are easy to manipulate. We have some AOD requirements, obviously, so keyboard controls, which are more difficult to program. Esther has been working diligently with Esri for them to find solutions that they can bring into our product, because we want it to be in the core solution, not us creating something and then having an update and it getting clobbered. So that's a real challenge. We want to make data available and usable to everyone. But that's a challenge in terms of AODA capabilities for everybody. Not everybody has the same understanding and ability, but yeah, want to make it simple and easy to use. And I think that's part of, even for staff, is you can do the shadow analysis by literally just clicking a button and having it run through automatically for you.
Fantastic. Okay. I don't see any other questions from members. Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. We're all looking forward to seeing these tools employed, especially through the comprehensive zoning bylaw exercise, which is where I think it will be of immediate help to help residents understand how might their neighborhoods change and what might that look like. So definitely looking forward to the implementation of those tools. Thank you very much. Clerk, do we have to do anything with this? Nope. We just get to move on. We don't have to receive it. Amazing. Thank you. So we move on to the next item, 780 Baseline Road. Kelly Livingstone will give a brief presentation. There are some slides available. I haven't asked for a full presentation on this because I think we've all seen the proposal in previous iterations. Just in terms of how this will roll out, staff are going to give us an understanding of what has changed since we last looked at this and since we last directed staff to come forward with some recommendations, at which point we will move to the applicant, who will have the opportunity to make a presentation to us. There are delegations, 5 public delegations. The Experimental Farm Agriculture Canada has chosen not to present today, so we'll just hear from those 5. Before we move on to questions of staff and debate. Councillor Devine, sorry. Just in terms of making sure the applicant has an opportunity to think about the motions that you've got presented today, can I ask you, I know you've got motions, could I ask you to bring those forward today, right now at this point?
Yes, technically, my colleague, Councillor Brockington, has motions. So yes, you definitely have permission. I assume Councillor Brockington is. I don't have a copy. Is it?
I would leave.
Yes. I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of you needs to read it in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't want to step on toes.
Thank you, Chair. I will move on behalf of Councillor Devine the following to be part of the beginning of our debate this morning. So whereas the Councillor of Ward 9 and local neighboring Councillor Ward 16, the city, proponent, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada have been working together in good faith to find workable compromises around the height of the proposed buildings along Baseline Road. And whereas city staff, in response to those discussions, have now brought forward a revised recommendation suggesting the maximum podium height along Baseline Road be increased from 4 stories, or 16 meters, to 6 stories, 24 meters, while maintaining the maximum GFA of the 2 towers at 65,000 square meters. And whereas each additional floor of podium height on the baseline portion of the development will facilitate a reduction in baseline fronting tower heights. And whereas Baseline Road is a major transportation corridor, with development in this area only being possible on the south side of the road, and is sufficiently wide to accommodate taller than average podium heights. Therefore, be it resolved that the Planning and Housing Committee increase the maximum allowable podium height fronting Baseline Road by 1 additional story by amending item 8 of the proposed zoning exception to read, quote, maximum podium height within the first 30-meter setback from Baseline Road or Fisher Avenue is 7 stories and 28 meters. Otherwise, a maximum podium height of 4 stories and 16 meters applies to all lands located within Area A and B of Schedule YYY. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. My understanding is that Councillor Devine will also be bringing forward a direction to staff, which they've indicated that they're willing to indicate. Let's get that on the table now, if we can, please.
So, Chair, again, on behalf of Councillor Devine, this is direction. Therefore, be it resolved that planning staff be directed to undertake discussions with the owner of 780 Baseline Road and representatives of Agriculture Agri-Food Canada with respect to the design of the Phase 2 buildings prior to the submission of a site plan application for that phase, and that staff prepare a memo back to Planning and Housing Committee to provide an update on the outcome of these discussions prior to the end of this term of council or submission of a site plan, whichever comes first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. We'll wait until we've heard everything, and I'll ask staff to accept that formally. In the motion, there is reference to GFA for the benefit of our millions of viewers worldwide on YouTube. Kelly, what is GFA?
Me? Is this thing on? Okay. GFA stands for gross floor area.
Gross floor area?
Gross floor area.
Thank you very much. So with that, Kelly, you have a brief presentation for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll wait for are there slides to be presented? Okay, I'll wait for those. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Kelly Livingstone, a development planner with the city, and I'm joined today by my heritage planning colleague, Luis Suarez. We're here to present to you the details of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for Phase 2 of the 780 Baseline Road application, for which committee considered Phase 1 last year on November 29th. Next slide, please. As explained at that November 29th committee meeting, the subject lands are located at the southwest corner of Baseline Road and Fisher Avenue. Next slide. The full build-out of the site includes 3 high-rise mixed-use buildings at maximum heights of 24, 24, and 32 stories. At the previous meeting, staff provided a recommendation for the first phase of development only, and that's indicated in blue on the slide, which was for a 24-story with frontage to Fisher Avenue. Today, a recommendation for Phase 2 is before you. That's the area highlighted in orange on the slide, which includes the 24 and 32 stories along Baseline Road. Next slide. Just simply elevations are shown for the 2 towers on the slide. Next slide. And here's an image of the shadow study for the entire development for the September 21st test date from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Next slide. Phase 1 was approved, of course, by Planning and Housing Committee on November 29th last year. The schedule and zoning change are shown on the slide. There were no appeals to that, and the bylaw is now in effect. Next slide. And as a reminder, staff were directed by motion to report back with recommendations on the remainder of these 780 baseline lands by today, January 31st. And next slide. Since the previous Planning and Housing Committee meeting, both the applicant and staff have worked expeditiously to resolve the remaining issues. These, as you'll recall, are related primarily to the heritage impact assessment and shadowing from the development on the central experimental farm. I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Luis.
Thanks, Kelly. Through you, Chair. So to start, I just want to clarify that the subject property 780 baseline is not designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. So a heritage permit application for this application is not required. That being said, it is a National Historic Site. The Central Experimental Farm is a National Historic Site. So the city requested that the applicant submit a heritage impact assessment to evaluate the development's regard for the cultural heritage value as defined in the Central Experimental Farm's commemorative integrity statement. As Kelly mentioned, staff did not make a recommendation on the entirety of the application back in November because the heritage impact assessment originally concluded that shadowing produced by Phase 2 could have a potential adverse impact on the experimental fields, plots, and shelter belts, and it was not clear whether these impacts were acceptable. The heritage impact assessment also failed to adequately describe the mitigation measures that had been or could be implemented to minimize shadowing impacts. Since November, the applicant has updated their heritage impact assessment. It considers an engineering study that evaluates the potential effects of sunlight obstruction on AAFC research plots, and more importantly, it includes an analysis of the massing options and design considerations that were undertaken. This analysis concludes that design considerations related to tower heights and floor plates and tower separation were implemented in the design of the 3 towers throughout the design process to help mitigate shadow impact and maintain the heritage attributes of the Central Experimental Farm. Staff accept this conclusion. Lastly, Heritage Planning acknowledges that AAFC continues to have concerns about the shadow impacts on their specific research, and to that effect, Heritage Planning encourages the applicant to evaluate different massing options at the site plan stage to further limit shadowing on the central experimental farm while maintaining the proposed density. And we've worked with Development Review to help facilitate this, so I'll hand it over to Kelly to speak on it more.
As Luis mentioned, the zoning bylaw amendment is somewhat unique, and it's written to provide flexibility in both the tower design and orientation at the site plan stage, with a maximum cap on the permitted density, gross floor area, on site. This will allow the applicant to consult and work with the AFC to further mitigate impacts, not only work with the AFC, but staff as well, to mitigate impacts of shadowing as the proposal further evolves. So with that, in conclusion, staff recommend that the phase 2 of the application be approved.
Kelly, thank you very much. We'll move on to presentations and delegations. I'll give the opportunity first to the applicants, Miguel Tremblay with Voten, Joy Taberge Homes, and Scott Anay. No strangers to our committee.
But I would ask the committee that our time not be consumed with our response to the motions that we've just seen. If the committee wants to ask us questions, that'd be great, but I don't want to use up our time, if that's okay.
No, of course, I would anticipate that someone will ask you your response to the motions that are on the table. So you have 5 minutes to use as you choose.
Okay, so Joey will make some opening remarks, and then I'll conclude. We'll talk about the motions after.
Everyone, so I'm Joey Taberge with the Taberge Group as the applicant. Little taken back, I haven't seen the motions now presented, but I guess we'll talk about that after. The recommendation that we've seen, I just want to mention, it's been a 2-year back and forth with the City of Ottawa, Allison Kelly, and their team. There's been a lot of mitigation and renderings done over the last couple of years, and I appreciate their help throughout this. Councillor Devine, we spoke a year ago when you got into council, and I think you stayed pretty consistent overall. We've worked well together. I appreciate that you're mentioned right in day one, you were supportive of the density, the site, and there was always a little back and forth about height and what the effects that would have. So I appreciate your help with that. And Ag Canada, we did finally get to meet about a month ago after the last committee. Pretty productive meeting, actually. They mentioned some of their concerns, and I shared what my concerns were, and we decided we would keep working together over the next few years when we get into the site plan on phase 2. So I just wanted to thank him for that. It's been a difficult file. I appreciate everyone's help on that. Thank you.
So my comments may be a little bit more pointed. Again, I'm not interested in revisiting the policy analysis itemized in the staff report. I just want to revisit some of the comments that staff made in terms of how we got here from November. The heritage impact statement was revised specifically to assess the considerations of the central experimental farm for the 2 towers. Recall, as you will, too, that the massing was also a function of the community to the south. It was not just an attempt to satisfy the farm, but rather there was a lot of moving parts. The HIS is now rooted in the analysis and findings of the Miller engineering report. That report considered potential shadow impacts on the capabilities of the farm to conduct research. I want the committee to recall as well that this report, although helpful to our discussion and really to address the farm's discomfort, is not typical. It's not required in your official plan. There was no criteria or parameters as to how to do this study. Staff offered some of those, and the study was prepared with that in mind, but it was not an obligation. We think it was helpful to allow the HIS to focus on some of the heritage considerations. If you've read the Miller report, the findings essentially conclude that the shadow impacts are less than was anticipated by the farm, both in terms of intensity and area. The impacts are in an area that is already subject to variables including road salts, fumes, existing trees and things like that that contribute to shadowing. So there was already the area of concern. because the farm basically, the Miller report actually concluded that about 2 acres of the 1,000+ acres of the farm will be subject to a 20% reduction in sunlight, which the committee's burden here is to decide if that's reasonable and appropriate in light of some of your other objectives of achieving density near transit. And we've already covered in previous presentations that given that the farm owns the properties to the north of Baseline and the area to the south is largely single family, this is truly the only property that's going to contribute to densities at your future BRT station. You heard from staff that the impacts to the central experimental farm were acceptable, reasonable and mitigated. Some of the mitigation includes lowering the tower heights from the previous proposal, fiddling with the podium configurations and heights, reworking and reorganizing the site in terms of tower placement and tower footprints, and increasing the separation between the towers. All of those were important, again, in dealing with the transition to the community to the south, but they also had a positive effect on the central experimental farm and the concerns that they raised. So I'm out of time, so I'll leave my comments to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, this is your opportunity to pose questions of the applicants. Councillor Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, like usual committees, we come in and as much as we try to resolve things in advance or find some kind of agreement between all parties, this morning I walked in and I heard the rumblings that, oh yeah, there's a motion coming, which I have, only seen this morning. I guess the question is, the mover of the motion, maybe I'll ask later on, was this done in consultation with city officials? I mean, like city staff, not councillors' offices. And second, to the applicant, that would be you, Miguel. Have you worked on this? Because I was under this understanding there was some agreement on something with podium heights or something. Have you been part of this process with city staff or with the councillor's office? When have you seen this? Because these last minute things, it's always difficult to deal with. And we've already tested everything else. So
in response to your question, Joey Taberge has been working with both the farm and the councillor. We did agree that the increase in podium height would be a helpful tool to start at the time of site plan, potentially distributing density a little differently modestly differently on the site. It would be helpful to see the motions in advance because the whereases are important as well. Because this whereas implies that inevitably, if there's an increase in podium height, there's a decrease in tower heights. That may not be the case. It may be that the massing is reshaped differently. Yeah. So I don't love the whereases. It's the therefore that matters. But I also don't want anybody to be misled relative to the outcome of those. Since my mic's already on, with respect to the second motion, I think the intent of the first motion is to provide some flexibility, and staff worked in some flexibility in the zoning as well. We don't see it necessary to come back to committee and advise where we're at. That's the point of the site plan application. Joey will continue to work with the farm and staff. Obviously, we do that regardless when we do a site plan application. I think it's an unnecessary step to come back and approve or seek additional direction from the committee when we will have a site plan application to massage the final outcome of the buildings. So I would discourage the committee from that motion.
And that was my question. I mean, every time we throw in a new roadblock, we're delaying the building of new housing. And we already went through this last time. That's all defined already. We want to see housing built. We're creatures of the province, and they've told us they want it built. And now we have these last-minute motions that apparently the applicant never even heard about. So I'll wait for the debate and discussion how, and Councillor Brockington moving on behalf of Councillor Devine, what interactions have taken place, when they received a copy of the application, and I'll hold my decision till wrap up, but at this point, I just want to see housing built, and I think we've already gone through that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'll interject after the other questions. Councillor Brockington.
I'm not sure whether it's appropriate now for some of Councillor Tierney's questions to be addressed by the local councillor, or how do you want them?
Yeah, so debate will happen after the presentations. If you have a question about how this has been framed for the applicant as to whether or not they agree with the framing of that, now is the time.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Mr. Therberge described or commented that you and or your team had met with Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada after our last planning committee when we dealt with Tower 1. Can you just describe what, in essence, that conversation entailed? What did you discuss? What was decided? What happened?
I'll take this. Yeah, it was a productive meeting. You know, it would have been good to have met with them years before, but it was a productive meeting. I think it was in December. And they were just hoping to have an open dialogue over the next few years. There was 4 members of Ag Canada at this meeting, and it had a good outcome. I said, I'll keep them privy to any site plan applications that come onto phase 2 and 3, the next 2 towers. I said, I'm open to giving dialogue, any mutually beneficial outcomes, I'm open to. I've had numerous discussions with Councillor Devine on what they could look like. But I was clear, I mean, I saw Councillor Devine's notes in the recommendation, and I just wanted to be clear, like, I'm not there to compromise with them or give them anything. I'm there to just see if there's a mutually beneficial plan. I don't know, can we see your second motion? I haven't seen that second motion yet.
Sorry, there's a direction that has been proposed for staff. I haven't yet asked staff whether they'll take that or not, but the... Thank you. Yeah, so the applicant is getting a copy. Take a moment, read that, and if you have a reaction to that, I'm sure the committee would be interested in hearing that.
Appreciate that.
So Chair, I'll just continue with my question. So the city planner received a letter in October from Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada, and they say in their letter that the proposed development raises serious concerns for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada with regards to risks to our agriculture, science integrity, and impacts to our best research fields. The revised design will continue to pose significant impacts risks to the central experimental farm. And they go into great detail. They raise about a dozen points. How do you respond to the experts who do the agriculture research at the farm who have serious concerns with the shadowing impacts on their lands?
Well, so I think the first part of the answer is with experts. So Joey Therberge found a consultant, an engineering consultant out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, fairly accomplished, to put a little bit of context to the farm's comments. And normally when the city receives evidence or the OLT receives evidence, it's impartial, not from the applicant or the proponent. So this is typical to have a competing report. The report concludes that despite the concerns raised by the farm, and they're legitimate concerns, and that's why we're here, but they are not as severe as implied. And I'm not a subject matter expert, but I will refer you back to the report where it concludes that the shadowing impacts are not as impactful, and certainly to a much more narrow area, approximately 2 acres, if I'm referring you to page 9 of the report, 2 acres of 1,000, and these 2 acres are closest proximity to Baseline Road, which the report concludes is already impacted by road salts, pedestrian activity, fumes, and other variables, including existing trees and hedgerows that contribute to shadowing already on that 2 acres, so that the impacts are not as difficult to manage. I can read you the section if you want, and I think I will. The AAFC shade study estimates a range of 1% to about 20% reduction in sunlight caused by the proposed structures. The potential area of concern appears to be about 47 acres out of approximately 1,000 acres for the Central Experimental Farm site. Within the potential affected area, the 20% reduction would likely be limited to less than 2 acres. The average expected impact across the 47 acres from the 1,000 acres would likely be about 5% reduction in sunlight. So it's obviously very important for the farm to input into this, but I think it's also important for council to have a different perspective and an objective opinion from another consultant. Thank you.
I appreciate you went out of the country to get an opinion from a group not based in Ottawa, and that you have discounted the actual people who do the agriculture research in Ottawa on behalf of Canadians who are saying that the shadow impacts of the proposed towers will yield detrimental impacts to their work. And so that's why I was curious when your client said he met with them a month after this letter was received, why that wasn't addressed, because they still firmly believe that there's going to be detrimental impacts. The Miller engineering study, as you say, concluded that the reduction in solar radiation by the proposed towers will not put research lands at risk. And they have 3 main conclusions in their report. 1, clouds in the sky, which will reduce solar radiation. 2, the literature cited shows that shade does not affect the yield. And 3, that the farm can do their crop research and breeding someplace else. So I want to go through these 3 points with the proponent now. The first point is clouds. So I'm going to read what a senior scientist at the farm has provided me, and I'd like to hear your reaction to his conclusions. The Miller engineering report tried to discount the shade study by introducing, quote, Ottawa average cloud cover to the calculation of minutes of sunlight lost on the research lands. The AAFC study calculated the amount of solar radiation lost as a percentage reduction in minutes of sunlight during the growing season. Clouds reduce solar radiation and net photosynthesis. This is true, but they do it on a random scale across a large geographic landscape. Farmers' fields experience clouds as well as the Central Experimental Farm research fields. However, shade cast by apartments make the lands unusable for research because of the variability of the shade. Sunlight will vary on a square meter basis, meaning that test plots that are side by side or across a pathway from each other will receive different amounts of sunlight during the growing season. Solar radiation is the driver of crop growth by affecting photosynthetic rates and yield. Of course, when you reduce sunlight, photosynthetic yields decrease, sugar production decreases, biomass and yield decrease. So what they're saying is there's a difference between cloud shade and apartment shade, and your study has focused on cloud shade. Do you have any comments on this?
Again, at the onset of my comments, I tried to be explicit that I am not a subject matter expert. I'm relying on the report, and I'm also resisting the temptation to rely on I shouldn't say common sense, but the distinction between different kind of shades. I mean, I'm not in a position to offer any comments to that other than the report concludes that one is actually more manageable than the other because one is random, one is predictable. Again, am I in a position to assess whether one is worse than the other? No. But I do want to remind the committee as well that it wasn't the scope of the committee's review as well to assess a study that is not an obligation, but rather to be helpful to the debate. And again, and I probably will regret some of the comments I make today, but the farm as well has a vested interest in protecting their area. What this report concludes is that the area to be protected is actually much smaller than what the farm is anticipating, and that it corresponds to roughly 2 acres of property immediately abutting a new municipal transit station. And the burden that the city
What I raised
had.
were concluding points in the Miller recommendation. One was clouds. I'm not an agriculture researcher, I'm an economist, but I know clouds move, apartment buildings don't. Cloud shade will vary over time. And so what the experts at the farm are saying is that one of the major conclusions of your report that you've paid for internationally is incorrect. So I wanted to hear your response to that. So Chair, you're telling me I have time. I have more questions, so should we go to other speakers and come back?
There are a couple of other councillors who wanted to ask questions, and each speaker at this committee is allowed to speak for about 5 minutes or so. You're out of that time. So could I ask you to come back on
For
the
sure.
speakers list at the end? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
No, I appreciate it. Councillor Devine?
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for coming, Mr. Tiberes. And I do appreciate Councillor Brockington's line of questioning about the apples to oranges comparisons, but I'll address those later. So I do want to mention that I very much appreciate the willingness that Mr. Tiberes has shown in working with my office. And I also just want to address the questions, that were raised. The motion that is before us today, it was circulated among committee members yesterday. This motion, whereas the proponent is only seeing the motion today, the substance of this motion is something that I have discussed at length with the proponent. This is not a surprise that I've discussed at length with committee. I think it represents the spirit of collaboration and working towards the best available solution that I've been looking to support over the past little while. Mr. Tiberes, as you mentioned from the beginning of my term, I've been working with various parties on this file to arrive at the best available solution. I've been encouraged by everyone's willingness to engage. What I certainly don't want to see is the spirit of collaboration with 780 baseline ending once we have the zoning approval, which speaks to the direction to staff that I've brought here today. So, Mr. Tiberes, you've been very willing to work with my office, the city, the community, the farm on this proposal. If you get your zoning approval today, you have previously said that you would be willing to continue working with the city and the farm to try and address concerns about the heights of the towers, provided you are still able to achieve your required density for this site. Is that still the case?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm going to continue working with them through that meeting that Councillor Brockton mentioned. I said during site plan, we'll continue discussions to see if there's a mutually beneficial alternate site plan that we can work with, as long as meeting that density.
Thank you. Is it also fair to say that if this motion passes to allow for the baseline fronting podiums to be up to 7 stories instead of 6, and if you still get the allowable density that's outlined in the recommendation, then this gives you the flexibility to build lower towers?
Yeah, we've had this discussion a few times, and I do agree through negotiations or through discussions, let me rephrase that, with the farm, if adding a 7-story podium gives me the density I need, is it possible to lower my heights? It is possible, but like I've explained to you a few times, building economics are all about efficiency. A tower at a certain, we always go on a debate on how big should a floor plate be. The bigger the floor plate of a tower, the more economical it is for a developer. And I've said this numerous times, I'd rather go wide than go up. I made the example to you, a site over in Canada in Councillor Curry's ward. It's a 6-story building that's flat right along the street. We do that because it's economical. So again, just saying by going up 1 story, will it definitely make me go down height? Not necessarily, because if my efficiency of my podium is at, I can go on for hours about this, but my efficiency is only at 70%, but my tower efficiency is at 85, that tower is more economical for a developer. But very high level, I would agree with your statement that by increasing a podium a story, there's potential to bring down your height to keep that density.
Thank you, because I truly am looking to advance a solution that, miracle of miracles, can support the objectives of many of the stakeholders involved. So would you say then, with this kind of modification, you raise the podium, you have the flexibility to raise the podium, you stick within your GFA, gross floor area, you pursue modifications for floor plate. If all of these collaborative discussions lead to those circumstances, giving you that flexibility, does this possibly even provide an advantage to you as a builder? Economic or otherwise?
Economically, if the tower plate gets bigger, that is a more efficient building for me.
Yep.
So that's when I talk about, am I going to negotiate with them and compromise? No, but if there's, I'm using the same word a few times, mutually beneficial. So if my plate can get wider, that's more economical, then I would be open to lowering a height. But again, I've said it to you before, based on your remarks, I'm not here to say I will negotiate with them and compromise with them and then come back and ask for more approvals later. If it works out for both parties, it will.
Yep.
And most developers would say the same thing. Bigger floor plate,
Absolutely.
more economical.
Thank you. Just, and then the last question. And I can understand why you might feel that the motion is binding you to lowering heights. No, it's providing you the flexibility. So generally, I want to ask, are you in support of the motion and the direction? And specifically, more to that, would you see, because I do not, but would you see the approval of this motion and the approval of the direction, which is basically to foster a spirit of collaborative discussion, do you see this as a way of delaying the construction of your projects? Because I see this as granting you a path to move forward and just flexibility. Do you see this as a delay of building?
I always hate when people at this table go and start talking amongst themselves. So
I'm talking, it's just me talking here.
I don't have my lawyer with me here. Is this a direction? Is that what that is?
Well, this is, to answer Joey's question, this is an obligation to go back to planning committee before the end of term of council, which may or may not coincide with your site plan schedule, because the committee may recall that we are doing site plan for phase 1, but so you would now have to have these discussions with the farm prior to you entering into site plan, because you're not there yet. You're still focusing on phase 2. So I think this is an unnecessary encumbrance, because the site plan will inform committee as to what the outcome of those discussions are.
If I may just ask, I just want to make sure that we're procedurally clear here. Ms. Alder-McDonald, Tim, what does this direction to staff require them to do?
This direction, as drafted, Mr. Chair, does not require that it comes back to committee. Committee is simply advised of the outcome by the memo, but there would no matter would be returning to committee, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Well, I think realistically, and I'm not trying to be difficult with your motion, but this says that there will be a motion advising committee on the outcome of a development application by Tiberge. We're coming back to committee. We would be part of those discussions. It adds a step. If that's an acceptable step, that's fine. It's just, it adds a step.
Okay. So what the direction does, according to my reading of it, is it requires staff to continue to talk to the developer and to the farm as we go through the process of developing a site plan. I think where we're getting stuck on is the memo back to this committee to let us know how those discussions turned out. What I'm going to suggest is we can find some alternative wording before the end of this meeting that staff are willing to take and that meet the councillors' needs as well as the applicants. Let's move past this portion of the language. I think we're having a couple of disconnects here that are easily solved. It is not our intention that once you have your zoning, that you would be coming back to this committee with respect to permission for the site plan. It is very clear that site plan is not a matter for planning committee anymore since Bill 109 or 108. And it is not our intention to have that discussion again. The intention of the motion that Councillor Devine is bringing to the table today, as discussed multiple times with your client, is to provide him with the flexibility. If there is some modification to the height that's possible in order to mitigate shadow impacts, but you need some additional podium height in order to make back your GFA, the zoning change that Councillor Devine's motion proposes today gives you that flexibility without binding you to anything. And then I think Councillor Devine just wants to see that staff are sent away to continue to talk to the applicant and to the farm about how that flexibility could be used in order to create a better project without coming back to committee. So I'm going to ask us to move off the direction. We'll find some alternative wording for that, and let's get back on to the substance of the discussion, please.
Point of order, Mr. Chair, just as a suggestion. Can we bring the applicant back in after staff have spoken or before staff have spoken? They literally just got a copy of this direction 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, there'll be some sidebar discussions, and assuming that staff, the applicant and Councillor Devine are able to find wording for this direction, we'll find a way to make sure that that confirmation comes back to this committee before we vote.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Devine, I believe you have 1 minute and 31 seconds remaining of your questioning time.
Is there, after questions to delegations, we have opportunity to speak again?
Yeah, so right now, this is your opportunity to ask questions of the applicant.
I'm good, thank you. Clearly, just for the record, direction aside, are you in support of the motion?
Yeah, high level, I would be supporting of the
motion.
This piece of paper.
Thank
this
you very
motion
much.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gower, Vice Chair Gower, sorry.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. So we've confirmed that, well, staff have recommended that the applicant evaluate different massing options, and we've heard that the applicant is open to that. One of those massing options could be an addition to the podium height, which would offset some other changes. And what I think I heard the applicant, Mr. Tremblay, say was concern is about setting expectations about changes to the overall height of the building. But I want to ask two questions. If we were to eliminate those whereas clauses so that there's no confusion or undue expectation, does that help the applicant? Would that be more acceptable to the applicant in terms of a motion in front of us today?
Yeah, I'd be in favor of this motion. The whereas are what surprised me today. But the therefore be resolved, that is what we've discussed and would be supportive of.
Okay. And then the other question would be, are there any other changes to zoning that would be helpful to give you more options to explore other massing possibilities?
You know, in my opinion, and in contrast to other applications, I think the city's approach to zoning here has been very flexible, recognizing that there are still some expectations from the farm in particular, and then maybe there's some things that might end up being of benefit to the residential community in the south as well. But I would say the zoning has been very accommodating. It still has restrictions. It has all the setbacks that are required for transition and all those things, but there's an inherent amount of flexibility in that zoning, which is appreciated. So I'd say no, unless I'm missing something.
Thank you, Chair.
No, I think you hit it good. That's why when I was thanking the city, it was very difficult to get to where we are today, to allow that flexibility moving forward. And I think it's been a good collaboration between the councillor, the city planning staff, and our group.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gower, I thought you were going to go here, but I'm wondering if I can propose a friendly amendment to eliminate that whereas clause that reads that it will facilitate a reduction in baseline fronting tower heights, because it does sound like the applicant is willing to work with you.
If I may, and it sounds like the chair is already considering something, but I was already looking at that whereas, and even if we replace will with may, three little letters.
Okay.
It's less binding. I don't even think will facilitate is binding, because facilitate just means allow for. It doesn't say will bang a nail into a wall. But if we go from will to may, we have the same spirit.
Do you want to propose that as a friendly amendment?
Propose that as a friendly amendment.
Do you want to take that as a friendly amendment?
Accepted.
And do you want to ask the applicant whether that's acceptable to them?
Do you prefer that language, may instead of will? There's a lot of journalists around this table, so we appreciate language. Former journalists.
In the world of policy, shall and will means something different than may, so yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. And then I'm just wondering, because I know that while we hear from delegations, there's going to be some movement perhaps, so I'm just wondering procedurally, should the direction be a motion, since there's some feelings around that? I'm just putting that out there.
Mr. Chair, a direction
to staff may be given if staff accepts that direction, and it's the will of the committee. Any member of the committee may call for a recorded vote on the direction. It would be treated as a motion at that time.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll deal with that when we get to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kitts. Councillor Curry?
I just have a very quick question, just in terms, so that I'm clear, maybe we're all clear. What power or value does a whereas clause have in the OLT? We talk about them being worthless, but then, when it came down, push comes to shove, or it comes in front of the OLT, this is really a question to Tim Mark, I think. What value do they really have?
I'm sorry, Chair, I missed the introduction to that.
The whereas clause. How much value does a whereas clause have? Like if it came to push come to shove, you're in front of the OLT, there's a whereas clause that says something. What does it matter?
So two parts to my answer, Mr. Chair, based on my experience in front of the OLT. If the whereas clause sets forth a factual conclusion that the tribunal finds to be unfounded, then the tribunal may give less weight to the active wording because it's found that counsel did not have the correct information before him. If the whereas clause is a policy statement of some kind, I would say it gets very little weight at all, Mr. Chair.
Very interesting when you think about when you're writing your whereas clauses and what value or weight they have. So thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. Councillor Brockington, resuming questioning of the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to the Miller engineering report that was part of the applicant's additional work, and go back to some of the main conclusions that the study relied on. And the second of the three main conclusions was regarding literature that was cited throughout the report. So again, I want to make some comments from a senior scientist on behalf of the farm, and again, have opportunity for the proponents' representatives to reply. So Miller engineering study uses literature to support their claims that a reduction in solar radiation is not a factor of concern in cereals or corn. However, when examined in detail, some of the studies were done in greenhouses, some with horticultural crops, and some done in Mediterranean or tropical climates. This is the report that they're basing their recommendations on and that our staff accepted. The Tullio study was done in horticultural crops like lettuce and tomatoes grown in a greenhouse that was shaded by solar panels. Of the 28 studies cited in their manuscript, only 5 were actually done in a field. The Risca study done in Indonesia, where the solar radiation is almost twice the amount in Ottawa, showed nearly a 1-ton reduction in corn yield with 25% less sunlight, which were the result of solar panels over crops. The first highlighted conclusion from the Ramos-Fluenta study on corn was that biomass and grain yield was significantly reduced by shade. The native grass mixture study done by Shemenko was not applicable to wheat, barley, or oats grown in monoculture. The winter wheat study by Lasha Kamur found that all levels of shade significantly reduced wheat yield in the 5 varieties they examined over 2 years of the experiment at 29 degrees north. The Tromsdorf and Wellsluck studies found an 18% and 19% reduction in wheat yields respectively in normal years, and only a 2 or 3% increase over the control and drought years. So the point here is that the studies that were used by Miller have significant issues with the data that's presented. In fact, when this senior scientist went back and looked at those studies, there's a direct correlation in lower yields because of shade. So I'd like to hear your comments on that matter, please.
Again, and I'm going to preface each answer the same way in that I'm not a subject matter expert, but the author of the report, Miller Engineering, feels that the studies were relevant, obviously, and cited them. That's really all I can offer.
Fair enough. I wanted to give you a fair opportunity to reply to the experimental farm senior scientist who's an expert in this field. And finally, the third and last conclusion from the Miller report was that, well, the farm can just go elsewhere. This agricultural research can be done elsewhere. And the response is that 780 Baseline Road, The lands across from 780 are some of the best researched land on the central experimental farm. It has even topography, is of uniform texture and well drained. Miller Engineering has failed to realize that these lands have been the source of some of the greatest achievements in agricultural research, contributing to the Canadian GDP. I'll just cut it short there. So again, your response to that, the lands between Fisher and Maryville are the best on the farm for agricultural research.
So again, I'll refer you back to some of the opinions that were offered in the report, that the area focus for the farm was about 47 hectares. Their analysis of sunlight concludes that the approximately 2 acres in closest proximity to Baseline Road, which is impacted by other variables, will experience a reduction of about 20%, whereas the balance of the 47 acres will experience a reduction in sunlight of 5%. My comments to the committee are consistent. It's the burden of this committee to decide if that's a reasonable impact when married up with other policy objectives of the city to add density near transit, recognizing that the farm beyond those 47 acres has 1,000 acres of flexibility. How they manage their property is truly their business, and I'm not going to offer an opinion on that. But I will remind you that staff also reviewed the Miller report as they did the heritage impact assessment and concluded that the impacts were less significant and reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. My recommendation at this point to Councillor Devine and to Joey is to find some direction to staff, asking staff to go away and work with the farm, work with the councillor to find a way to mitigate some of the shadow impacts from the height using the flexibility that I assume we're going to pass with the amending motion. To come back to us before the end of this meeting with a form that's acceptable to the various different parties. So at this point, I'm going to move on to the public delegations. Thank you very much for the presentation. Leslie Maitland is with Heritage. Oh, sorry, bear with me. Okay. Leslie Maitland is with Heritage Ottawa. Sorry, Leslie. And then following Leslie, we're going to hear from Elizabeth Costello. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Leslie, can you just stay there? But we'll listen to Elizabeth Costello with the Carlton Heights and Area Residents Association first. I appreciate your patience, Leslie. Thank you. Elizabeth, welcome to Planning and Housing Committee. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee, the organizers of the committee for their help. I'm with the Carlton Heights and Area Residents Association, and I'm here today to speak about the development at 780 Baseline. If we can move forward, please. Our association works hard to interpret policy with the help of the City of Ottawa and through their consultations with residents who provide their feedback on inquiries and concerns. And we've been doing so on this file since 2022, and we met with Joey Tiberge and Tiberge Developments in March 2023 and expressed our concerns. Moving forward, please. The official plan helps direct the developments in our area in several places, not just this one area. And it's a balanced approach, recognizing what's already there with what needs to come. And we do support housing in our area. Moving forward, please. The reality is that the official plan is dependent on clauses within the official plan and the secondary plan. And we're well familiar with the sensitive integration needed and minimizing impacts on the outer urban transect that we live in, as well as complementing the surrounding context of the farm. And certainly understanding that this evolution needs to happen gradually. Moving forward, please. The secondary plan, in the official plan policy, the secondary plan supersedes. So where there are inconsistencies in policies between this plan and secondary plans or area-specific policies, the official plan states that those policies contained in secondary plans take precedence. We, along with the Fisher Heights and Area Community Association, have received legal opinion that our secondary plan needs to be held up for this area. Moving forward, please. The biggest concern, of course, is the height of the towers, 20 full stories, and the parking as well for safety and balanced approach to the limitations of the infrastructure of our area. Moving forward, please. You can see here there are many spots for development in our area, and we welcome new housing. We do believe this is an aggressive approach and that it is based on a private sector interpretation, and it's frankly just too much. So we would like a more balanced approach, recognizing the limitations of the area and the infrastructure that is there. Moving forward, please. We have narrow roads, no sidewalks, and limitations to our underground infrastructure that has not been documented well by the city. So when we talk about scenarios, we are dependent upon the inputs. We need you to read the fine print of the engineering studies that have been provided and understand that data is either missing, qualified, or lost, and where there is no data at all in some instances. So scenarios depend on inputs. We've been told main trunk sewer lines cannot carry the extra load of this development, and collector lines won't carry the increases. So the limits of our 17-year-old infrastructure are real. Moving forward, please. We have extra parking with intensification that flows into our neighborhoods, causing real problems for pedestrians and cars and services alike. Overflows block corridor flow, which is also in the official plan. That needs to be, flow needs to be maintained. Move forward, please. Safety hazards occur. God forbid we have accidents or a personal injury due to excess traffic that will come with this intensification. Moving forward, please. Again, our aging infrastructure, we do not have the data that reflects any infrastructure that will support the intensification. In fact, we have the contrary here, that we need to be careful in this area because of the constraints. Moving forward, please. We want to go beyond the threshold. We want housing, but we want accountability that doesn't add costs down the line, either to the city or to renters and residents that will enter the neighborhood, that will have new fees or possibly new limits to insurance, etc. These are real costs that we are handing to new people entering our neighborhood if we don't be accountable today. Thank you very much. We welcome
Elizabeth.
20 stories.
Elizabeth, thank you very much for the presentation. I don't see any questions from members. So we'll move on. Thank you very much for being a Planning and Housing Committee meeting today. Leslie, I swear this time it's your turn.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Lieber, and I want to thank all of the members of this committee. I am heartened by the tenor of debate about this site. I know we're asking you to make the judgment of Solomon here, but I think Solomon is here in this room. So although you can drive a truck through the word may. With respect to this one, as you know, I'm representing Heritage Ottawa, and this is one of the rare instances where the function of a National Historic Site is the reason for its designation. The Rideau Canal, similarly, it's designated because it is a functioning canal, and we wouldn't want to see that function impaired. It's too important to the City of Ottawa, too important to Canada. I'm not going to reiterate all of the points that Councillor Brockington raised with reference to the Miller report, but I think it's fairly clear, it's fairly obvious that the Miller report is flawed in methodology and therefore flawed in its conclusions. This unfortunately leads us to the situation whereby the Heritage Impact Assessment, which is based upon the Miller conclusions, is as well flawed in its methodology and conclusions. This is unfortunate, but I detect nevertheless in the tenor of this debate a significant desire to mitigate impacts to the farm. And I encourage you to go forward and that you will encourage the developer, Agriculture Canada, and the city to come to a less impactful situation. And you have my written comments, so I won't repeat those. If it is necessary to have an independent study of shadow impacts on the farm, may I suggest contracting with an agricultural firm, not an engineering firm? If you looked at the website of Miller Engineering, you'll notice that they are a forensic engineering company who specialize in analyzing transportation accidents. So Canada is blessed with several stellar faculties of agriculture who would be very much in a position to conduct the kind of independent research needed to assess impacts. So that's one observation. Going forward, I'm sure we don't want to have this discussion again and again and again. We had it at 1081 Carling, and development's just going to continue. I would like to recommend on behalf of Heritage Ottawa that you amend the official plan. The previous official plan identified the farm as a research institution. This official plan identifies it as green space. That is a world of difference, and that difference has led to significant difficulties assessing impacts. What is the nature of the impacts and how can they be mitigated? Going forward, I would also encourage the city and Agriculture Canada to come up with some kind of practical protective measures to protect the farm going forward. And you're the people who know how to do this, whether it's in terms of special zoning on the periphery of the farm. You're the smart people who know how to do this sort of thing. I hope these are practical suggestions going forward, not only dealing with this proposal, but in future proposals. I strongly support the idea of addressing the podium as a way of lowering the heights. That seems very practical and very fair. It's not a case of food versus housing. We want both, we must have both, and we can have both. So I thank you very much for your thoughtful discourse on this issue, and I look forward to a more positive resolution. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Councillor Brockington?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just keep my question fairly brief. First of all, thank you for your delegation. You noted the firm has the historic designation, which comes with no protections at all for the land. And thank you for providing some ideas for the city and this committee to consider going forward. But what role do you think the federal government has, particularly AAFC, in protecting those lands going forward?
It is up to Agriculture Canada, Ag Canada, to represent the values of the ongoing research values of the farm, which also happen to be the reasons for its designation as a National Historic Site. You point out correctly that there is no legislative protection for National Historic Sites. The Government of Canada can designate National Historic Sites, but currently there is no legislative protection. That legislative protection is currently in the works. It's at second reading in Parliament. And we are working with members of Parliament to see that pushed forward. But it really is boots on the ground. Ag Canada has to fight its own corner here.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just one question about your one of your recommendations about independent research. Interestingly, I've been doing a lot about independent research, and I think the conclusion is there's no such thing. Bias is everywhere, right? So I'm just wondering who you would recommend. I mean, I can't imagine that Heritage Canada or Agriculture Canada would be unbiased. I mean, their research relies on grant money, which relies on, then their jobs come from it, research proposals, students, master's students, all the rest of it. I mean, they're all biased, right? So where would you recommend we go to get a completely unbiased independent? I mean, the developer went to the US, right? They could care less, I'm sure, about what actually happens here. So that is a possible independent. But where else would you recommend we go to get an actually independent, unbiased opinion?
Oh, well, I would recommend a faculty of agriculture. If you are worried that a faculty of agriculture in Canada might be biased as well because they in turn rely upon government grants, you could go to a faculty of agriculture in another nation. In fact, at the time that the Central Experimental Farm was being pressured to give up 50 acres of land for the hospital, professors at faculties of engineering in Great Britain, Australia, Brazil, University of Ohio, all wrote to the Government of Canada to support the importance of the agricultural research being done at the farm. The research being done at the farm is of international caliber. The research being done at the farm contributed to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, for which they won the Nobel Prize. So there are independent faculties of agriculture. If you feel that Canadian universities would be biased, then there's certainly nothing biased about the University of Aberdeen or the University of Ohio.
Wonderful. Thank you for those recommendations.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. Thank you, Leslie. Catherine Kitts. Councillor Kitts, please.
Thank you, Jeff. Chair. Building off of Councillor Brockington's question, do you think a good next step for Ag Canada would be to appeal to the federal government to entertain buying the parcels around the farm so that they could limit the height in perpetuity, and then this committee wouldn't be in this position of having official plan policies in place that contradict the, intentions of the farm?
As much as one might suggest that, Treasury Board would say no. And in fact, you would end up having to buy all of the land, certainly on the south and the west side, to manage shadowing. So it sounds like a great idea, but I don't think it's very practical.
But you can appreciate the position that we're in.
Yeah,
where we have
absolutely.
private,
Hence my reference to the judgment of Solomon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kitts. Ms. Maitland, I don't see any further questions for you. Thank you very much for your intervention today. We'll move on to David Miller. Is that on in person? Mr. Miller, welcome to the Planning and Housing Committee meeting. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Push a button. Okay. So thank you for allowing me to speak for a few minutes. It's actually quite entertaining. So I'm David Miller. I'm a distinguished research professor at Carleton University, and I live in Old Ottawa East. About 60% of my career has been focused on addressing mycotoxins in small grain and corn, which may not sound important, but it's about $1 billion a year of loss to our food system in North America. But I guess the point there is I do really care a lot about agriculture in Canada and elsewhere. So I worked on the Central Experimental Farm for the first 15 years of my career, coming to Carleton University in the fall of 1997. The point of that is that I haven't cooperated or published with anyone there at least for 2 decades. So by the normal rules, the conflict of interest isn't there. Aside from my scientific work, I have considerable experience in providing expert advice to government, supranational agencies, and the courts, including once randomly I volunteered to help a litigation against the city of Ottawa because it was so frivolous, I thought. That said, I have 3 comments. Agriculture Canada addressed the report from the US-based company on the shadowing impact of the proposed building. I cannot defend many of the statements in the US consultant's report. They're not here to answer. But I can't defend it. And thinking of my duties as a public scientist, I cannot recommend that elected and appointed officials depend on some of the assertions made. This leads me to my second comment. The Miller Engineering Report expresses the opinion, and I quote, Ottawa Research and Development Center, not spelled correctly, is not unique in terms of the crops that they study. Many other research facilities throughout Ontario and Canada would seem capable of conducting similar research, and such research may be located closer to where a majority of the production is occurring. The Central Experimental Farm is one of the original 5 farms in the Experimental Stations Act of 1886. It is not here because it was then on the far outskirts of Ottawa where there are existing farms. It is here because it represents the climate for farms roughly between Peterborough and outside Quebec City. This means the temperatures are what are called in the corn breeding business, corn heat units, daylight. So we're 2 degrees more north of Guelph, for example, and to some extent the soils. The climate of Eastern Ontario is not like that in Southern Ontario, and no cultivars that work or genotypes that work there or in Michigan do well here. This is important. In 1980, which is maybe some people would remember 1980 here, if you were to drive out to rural Ottawa today, you wouldn't see anything but hay, hardly. And now when you drive out, you see corn, soybeans, and small grains. We grew hay in the cold part of Ontario. And this is entirely because of work done on the Central Experimental Farm. The positive economic and environmental impact of this is enormous. Eastern Ontario, now including 300,000 acres of farmland in Ottawa, in the city of Ottawa, is about 15% of agriculture, of Ontario agriculture, which is about 40% of Canadian agriculture. So that's not trivial, at least not in and I think of the farmers that I've spent a lot of time worrying about. Today, the farm works to ensure crops in this region remain tolerant to new crop diseases and insect pests that move because of climate change. I don't really care about what they did 100 years ago, but I care about what they do today for Eastern Ontario. So no, it's not so easy to say, well, do it in Winnipeg or somewhere. It just wouldn't work. I do note that the breeding crops is required by the federal historic designation. Finally, when the idea was to pave 65 acres of prime and well-studied farmland on Carling Avenue, one of the things I did was help with a study of the environmental impact on the 250,000 or so people that live within 10 clicks. As it stands, the CEF provides enormous climate and health benefits. Nighttime temperatures are lower within that radius all around the farm, which means lower air conditioning costs, and also air pollution is controlled, is reduced. And so there's big environmental and respiratory health effects, and yes, this is published and it's well cited.
Mr. Miller, you are out of time. Could I ask you to wrap up?
Just have one more sentence. I'm deeply concerned that we be cautious about anything that would compromise those impacts. Thank you for listening. Feel free to ignore my advice.
Mr. Miller, I don't see any questions from members. Thank you very much for the presentation this afternoon. And we will move on to Paul Johannes, who is online. Paul, we're in your hands. You know the drill.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm here today on behalf of the Green Space Alliance of Canada's capital. So the official plan contains a specific policy concerning the Central Experimental Farm. So it reads as follows: the Central Experimental Farm, west of the new Civic Hospital site, remains for scientific, educational, and cultural purposes only, and is not intended for non-Central Experimental Farm development. So we've already heard arguments about the educational and cultural purposes to be made by Heritage Ottawa and Dr. Miller just now. But I'd like to sort of emphasize, but what remains is that the scientific purposes of the Central Experimental Farm will certainly be negatively affected by the approval of development applications for structures that shade research fields, such as this one at 780 Baseline Road. can the Central Experimental Farm in the long term remain for scientific purposes, sort of any awkward wording of the OP, if more of these applications are approved? There's a cumulative effect here. There's the entire perimeter of the farm where this can happen. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. So it was the recognition of this issue following the approval of 1081 Carling that led to the establishment of an Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, NCC, and city working group to arrive at a satisfactory solution for building heights around the perimeter of the farm. Now, the staff report indicates that the terms of reference for this working group are now being developed. Well, we haven't seen any conclusions or any work yet from this working group. Be curious to know what the status is of that group now. Now, the outcome that we would expect from this working group would be for it to complete its work expeditiously and to set the stage for an official plan amendment that would codify building heights on the perimeter of the farm in one or more area-specific policies. So ideally, a decision on the application before us now should be deferred until the working group has completed its work. Now, if this is not possible due to legislative deadlines, then flexibility regarding massing and setbacks should be maintained until the working group recommendations are known, and then those recommendations taken into account in the design of this project. Now, the staff report, while recommending the approval of the new zoning, leaves open the question of massing on site, and we've heard discussions about this earlier during the meeting. So the potential for further changes that would reduce shading impact can be dealt with through site control. So there could be an opportunity to adapt the design to whatever new building height guidelines come out of the work of the working group. So in this context, I think consideration should be given to prioritize the farm side of developments in the guidelines, in that the adjoining neighborhoods to these developments, to these high-rise developments, are likely to evolve into more four-story and mid-rise under the new OP over time. They're evolving neighborhoods, and that alters the geometry of the required transitions between the neighborhoods and the project. So a final point on the specific report. Now, the report also includes, the staff report includes like results of the application of the city's shading study methodology, which is really inappropriate for this development. It was inappropriate for 1081. It's inappropriate for this one because it's about a methodology that deals with public spaces. And the Central Experimental Farm research fields are not public spaces within the meaning of this policy. Rather, they are publicly owned, but they're restricted access outdoor workplaces, that rely on consistent sunlight. So this is a land designation that's just not considered in the OP. There's nothing in the OP that talks about that kind of land. And really, it's the absence of policy direction on this issue that needs to be addressed and amended through the working group's eventual recommendations. Like there's a gap there that needs to be addressed. So we understand that, planning decisions are all about balancing the different, sometimes competing official plan policies. It's our view that more weight needs to be given to the protection of the Central Experimental Farm. We can be inspired by the NCC's urban land plans. Clearly, they have the experimental farm as of significant importance to the capital. The agricultural research plots contribute significantly to Canadian knowledge in agriculture and horticultural science. They have a designation for the farm as an agricultural and horticultural research, and it's intended to preserve the integrity of the CEF as a space that represents rural Canada within the urban fabric and is a key contributor to the Capital Green Space Network. And their policy directions are all around intending to conserve the farm's assets and contributions for the long term. So the city's own urban plan, the official plan, the decisions we take under that official plan ought to reflect the same objective and the same commitment. So that's my delegation for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johannes. Are there any questions from members? I do not see any. Thank you very much, Paul, for your intervention today. We'll move on to our last public delegation. Katie Ward is with the National Farmers Union
Thank
and
you very
is online. Good morning and welcome, Katie. You have 5 minutes to present to the committee.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning on behalf of the thousands of farmer members of the National Farmers Union who rely heavily on plant varieties developed within Canada's experimental farm network from coast to coast to coast, but especially those of us who farm locally. I am a farmer in Ward 5, and I grow vegetables and grains and raise animals that feed my community, including multiple varieties that were originally developed by scientists at the Central Experimental Farm here in Ottawa. Councillors are well aware at this point about the significant concerns raised by scientific staff at AAFC concerning this development. My understanding, of course, is that the developer has been in discussions with AAFC and that there has been some positivity regarding these discussions, although the success of any attempts to address their concerns is really not transparent or evident to us as farmers at this point. I will not presume to speak for the scientists at AAFC, as I understand that their continued concerns have been added into the official record as an amendment to their original comments based on these updated plans and report from the developer. But as farmers who are stakeholders in their continued work, we do want to register our support for their valid scientific concerns and express to you our concern that the updated heritage impact assessment from the developers, based on the developer's consultant, included utilizing comparative climate data from as far away as Southeast Asia. And I would strongly encourage councillors and staff to place this information in the context of why Canada has as an experimental farm system in the first place. It's because growing conditions here in Eastern Ontario or Western Quebec are not the same as what farmers face in Swift Current, Saskatchewan, let alone Southeast Asia. Replicable and geographically and climatically appropriate science in plant and animal breeding is the cornerstone of our food security. Additionally, comments that the area of the farm under discussion are already negatively impacted by road salt and traffic fumes. In response to that, I would submit that these same conditions apply to my farm as well. I would like to make clear that the National Farmers Union is extremely sympathetic to the need to intensify housing within the urban core as one solution to the very real problem that we face in preserving farmland. But that intensification needs to be done with care and consideration to the impacts on work being done by other jurisdictions, in this case, federally. The research being done at the Central Experimental Farm, both now and in the past and the future, has very real implications for the ability of farmers to adapt to the climate emergency we now find ourselves in. When we speak of cultural heritage, councillors may not be aware of the thousands of varieties of vegetables and breeds of animals that came out of work done by scientists at the farm, including drought resistance and resistance to wind and heat and pest damage. The cultural heritage of the farm goes beyond the older buildings and the views of green space that many consider to be the be-all and end-all of heritage at the farm. But as a farmer, the work done there contributes to the heritage of both how we feed our community to this day and our ability to carry forward this legacy. We need the science being done at the farm to mitigate against the extreme weather of the climate emergency so we can continue feeding our community into the future. I personally grow varieties of Ottawa tomatoes and have raised Rito Arcot sheep, to give you some specific locally adapted examples. This isn't an abstract issue for those of us who feed you. It has the potential to have very real and very negative impacts if we're not careful and thoughtful about how we proceed. We're pleased about the working group with the city staff that is going to be going forward to address a comprehensive plan. But to act precipitously to grant an exemption to increase the height of neighboring development in the absence of said plan both simultaneously kicks the can down the road and makes the problem worse than it already is. In our view, developments that encroach on the experimental farm are already problematic in a variety of ways, but we would strongly encourage councillors to avoid exemptions that not only assist with, mitigate, or adapt to the climate emergency, but also hold potential to harm our future food security in a climate emergency. In regard to the recent motion, it's relatively new, so I would just say that we are in favor of requirements to accommodate collaboration with scientific staff at AFC in this matter, as well as keeping our elected representatives in loop about how these discussions progress. And I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ward. I see that Councillor Kelly has a question for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And of course, whenever a Ward 5 resident appears before the committee, I want to thank them very much for their time and for coming to share your words with the committee and as we make this decision. And I know there's been several discussions about this area and the development that takes place along this corridor and the effect that it has on the farm. And I think a lot of the topics that are discussed can seem quite abstract to people, or we talk in larger terms or effects, but maybe you could just share some, how the work on the farm affects you as a farmer, affects your neighbors and our community, and if there's anything specific that you could add that you weren't able to get out in your time.
Absolutely, thank you. I think one thing to really consider is that the shade study that has been done and speaking about the potential for it to quote unquote only affect 2 acres of research land at the farm. Every acre and every variable that is introduced into the scientific studies that are being done on that farm has potential to cause knock-on effects that could be quite harmful. We do rely on things like plant breeding for wind resistance in our grain crops, for example. We've had derechos here in tornadoes in this area, and they've caused great damage to wheat fields and cornfields, and the yields that are affected by wind damage, for example, on our crops that feed our community are really significant, and we do need the work of the farm to continue. It applies to all of the many thousands of acres of land within the city of Ottawa, let alone outside of it. And the research scientist who spoke earlier, the retired gentleman, raised some really, really valid points that we cannot just rely on research being done outside of our geographical area. The reference to heat units for corn, for example, what happens in Guelph, which, there's lots of great research being done down there, but it has relatively little applicability to our growing conditions in the heat units that we get to grow corn or other, small grains up here. It's a very different scenario. We can't even select the same varieties of crops that farmers down near Sarnia, for example, can select for. We have to buy different seeds, and a lot of those seeds are based on plant breeding research that was done at the experimental farm, because it's been commercialized by companies that are selling these varieties, but it was developed in our geographical area for our climate conditions. And, it's a little abstract for folks who aren't in the business of growing food here, but it makes a real difference. Something that's done just for 6 hours away by car just can't necessarily grow or thrive in the same conditions that we have here. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. That's all for me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Katie, for being here today. I think in previous discussions on this item, or on the previous item that impacted the farm, I said, we haven't heard from farmers in these delegations. So I'm happy to see you here. I don't believe I've had a lot of engagement with your organization in the past. So I appreciate you're here. It's a national union. You're speaking, on behalf of farmers across the country. But do you have an active contingent in Ottawa, and how big is your membership here?
We have hundreds of members within our particular local 362 of the National Farmers Union covers Ottawa, Stormont, Dundas, Glengarry, and Prescott Russell. We collaborate on a lot of work in terms of farmland preservation with the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, which you may be also familiar with. When the work around the Civic Hospital was happening, we collaborated with the local Federation of Agriculture to preserve farmland in that case as well. But we have a strong history of supporting public science in agriculture, and we would be happy to meet with you on a more regular basis as well. Unfortunately, a lot of times consultations around issues such as this tend to happen in May or June, and we are farmers and we dedicate our time to these organizations outside of the hours where we have to be out in the field. So, sometimes consultations don't occur at times that are conducive to participation from farmers, but I'm happy to answer questions from you today. Thank you.
Thanks for telling us a little bit more about your organization. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Katie. I don't see any further questions for members from you. So thank you very much for the presentation today. I would be interested in hearing more as well. If there's an introductory email you want to send around to planning committee members, that might be useful. Thank you. So that is it for the public delegations. We're going to move on to questions of staff, but before we do, the councillor applicant and have had a discussion about direction to staff. I'm going to ask Kelly to put that up on screen, please. So the direction that is currently being contemplated is as seen on screen, being brought by Councillor Brockington. Councillor Brockington, do you want to read that out?
Thank you, Chair. As you said, sort of a revised wording is the following: that planning staff be directed to undertake discussions with the owner of 780 Baseline Road and representatives from Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada with respect to the design of the Phase 2 buildings prior to the submission of a site plan application for that phase, and that staff prepare a memo to advise members of council on the outcome of these discussions prior to submission of the application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. I wonder if we can dispense of that now. Is that acceptable to the applicants? Do you have any objection if staff were to take that direction? You're good with it? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So is that direction the staff are prepared to take?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so now it is time for questions of staff.
I was waiting for others. So thank you, Chair and colleagues. So staff, can you just give me a high-level summary of what work you've done over the last 2 months on this file since it was last before Planning Committee? Give me an overview of what exactly has transpired.
Definitely. Mr. Chair, since the conclusion of the previous Planning and Housing Committee meeting, staff went back, the developer went back, and so they prepared those two studies, both an updated heritage impact assessment and the Miller engineering report, to which there's been much discussion. Thirdly, staff and the applicant worked quite heavily on a zoning bylaw amendment which would enable future development to potentially respond to future discussions that the applicant and staff are to have with AAFC in order to enable a greater mitigation of those shadow impacts from the development. It is quite a unique zoning bylaw. Typically, we look at a very specific site schedule to state exactly where a building is going to be based on what was applied for. But instead, this zoning, it applies that GFA and it regulates those aspects which are most important, such as tower separation, distance from the community, the low-rise community in the back. And so we're all quite happy with that. Furthermore, I wasn't involved with these discussions, so perhaps Allison can elaborate if needed. Staff and the developer have both met with the AFC, I believe separately, sorry. So staff with AFC, senior staff have met with them, I think 2 or 3 times, was it? 3 times? To have what I understand were productive conversations. And as well, the developer, I understand, has met with AFC as well to further explore possible solutions. So yeah, of course, staff report, and then we're reporting to you today.
So the meetings with AAFC were in addition to the working group, which I think has had 1 meeting. Is that correct? So you say that the meetings with AAFC have been productive. What exactly, I mean, they're writing to us and saying, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. The proponent said he had a productive meeting with AAFC. They write back and say, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. So what did those discussions entail? I would assume they'd say, we're still not happy with what's being proposed. So, and you're approving Tower 2 and 3 to go ahead. So how can you have a productive meeting if the other party is saying, this is not working for us?
Mr. Chair, if I may, the discussions with the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada really focused on their review and comments of the Miller Engineering Report and the Heritage Impact Study, and working forward, I guess, in the spirit of collaboration in order to outline how the discussions may take place following the decision of committee and council. And, so there really was a recognition, I think, by all parties that the developer is willing to participate in those discussions, and that a recognition that, there are elements of the concerns from Ag Canada that may get addressed through that. There are elements of the concerns from Ag Canada that may get addressed through the broader study, which you're quite correct, did meet in December as a steering group to sort of start those discussions with respect to the terms of reference for that study. I think there's also a recognition from Ag Canada that there is a policy framework in place that supports development and housing along this corridor, given the investments that are going to be made in transit. And so, we are certainly not saying that Ag Canada, endorses this development. I think that would be far too much of a stretch, but I think there is a recognition that we're going to continue to work going forward to try to resolve their concerns as much as possible, but recognizing as well that, there's also much work to take place on the broader issue along the entire corridor, not on just this site.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Who from the city assessed the Miller report?
To you, Mr. Chair. I think that warrants a greater clarification. Staff reviewed and provided comment on the Heritage Impact Assessment only, not the Miller report. We do not have the capacity nor expertise to review an agricultural report of that nature. And so I wanted to be clear that we defer to the AFC for their comments, who have a particular expertise on their lands, especially as they relate to research and crop production. Staff acknowledge those concerns, and again, that sits outside of our professional expertise. The staff recommendation before you is most informed by the analysis of changes made to the design and orientation of the three towers throughout the design process, which were measures that could mitigate the shadow impact. Some of those have been talked about. It's a reduction in tower heights, increase in tower separation, and narrowing the tower widths between one another. So ultimately, the HIA itself, which staff have the expertise to review, and my colleague can elaborate on that, it now meets the city's terms of reference for the preparation of a heritage impact assessment.
So the revision came after this committee last met? I'm trying to get my dates in sequence here.
Yes, it was a revised HIA in accompanying with the Miller engineering
Fair
report.
enough, okay, very good. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe?
Thanks, Chair. I missed roll call because I slept in. But anyway, one of the public delegations, I believe the community association, said that the local, I think, sewage infrastructure, I believe, is not adequate to handle a development of this scale if exactly what's proposed was built. Is there any city staff available who could provide some more insight to that and perhaps confirm, maybe refute that claim at all?
I can speak generally on it, Mr. Chair. So the applicant submitted a report called an Assessment of Adequacy of Public Services report, and it was reviewed by engineering staff. The purpose of that report generally is to review the expected septic, water, stormwater impact of the proposed development and whether the existing infrastructure can support that. That was deemed sufficient, And as I understand it, a greater analysis will be done at a site plan stage, which will be much more detailed and comprehensive.
Sounds great. Thanks very much.
Thanks. I don't think I have questions. We've covered a lot of ground, but I had some kind of wrap-up comments, if that's okay, Chair? Yeah. So every development impacts neighboring properties in small ways and in big ways. And I think what I've heard from staff today and back in November and even previously when we were dealing with the one on the north side of Carling, the objective is to ensure that the applicant is minimizing impact in any reasonable way. So in this case, we've seen the applicant, since we talked here in November, have taken steps to minimize the impact of shadows on the farm to the north. And there may be more opportunities to change the building's massing or reconfigure something to even further minimize. So staff's evaluation is, from a shadowing perspective, this applicant has done what is reasonable to mitigate. And then the other question that we're struggling with, I think, falls outside of Planning and Housing Committee, and it's about the impact and what we're willing to accept on the viability of particular research lands on the farm. The Heritage report, or we're evaluating against the farm's commemorative integrity statement, which is online, and there's a section that says the designated place will be unimpaired and not under threat when a sufficiently large area to carry out and support the scientific research function is maintained, and when the farm remains sufficiently large to contrast the scale of urban development. I think that's what's important in that report. I don't think anyone around this table would disagree that these shadows will have an impact in some way on the farm, but they're not preventing research. They might change the specific research that's happening there in some way, but it doesn't affect the size of the farm, it doesn't affect the ability to farm, it doesn't affect the ability to do research. And I just can't see a reason why we would not approve this development today. I think there's legitimate concerns about the viability of future farm research and what kind of research they can do, but that's outside of what we have the ability to adjudicate as this planning committee. So it's a tough question, and I hope that anyone listening doesn't get the impression we don't care about the farm or about the important research or the value of that research. But we're a planning and housing committee, and we have to evaluate based on the tools and the policies and the framework that we have. And I think staff have provided advice that I agree with and is reasonable and justifiable based on planning policies. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Gower. Councillor Tierney, you had your hand up first.
Apparently I did. My elbow must have known I wanted to be on there. I took it back off and put it back on, but if you wish for me to go ahead right now, just by way of wrap up and everything. First of all, thanks to the delegations that did come out today. I think we know these files more about farming and trains and things than any other council would ever be expected to know. And other things. But that being said, we've had a thorough discussion, and I think we have a big problem. In general, we're not getting a lot of guidance from the federal government, except we've heard from them repeatedly about housing, and we all agree. And then, the agriculture individual, the minister, has not really come out raging on this one either. So they're kind of caught as well. We're all caught in a bind. We've heard from our legal team, if this ever went to another level and it went to tribunal, shadowing would not be a factor, period. So we're really caught in this. I fully support what's going forward. And I just wanted to confirm I'm glad we got the modifications of directions and whatever happened in the last few hours. With the wording about, let's say they reach out to Agriculture Canada, and Agriculture Canada doesn't get back to them, should it not include just an amendment to say the best effort to arrange those discussions? And maybe I'll look to legal staff, because I'd be afraid, again, this would be seen as some matter of delay. And of course, there would be reasonable time built in. But I don't want to be sitting here next year talking about the exact same thing, because parties were unable to meet, and I just want to make sure there's no unnecessary delay.
Mr. Chair, I don't see a delay that would be created by this direction. The staff are to provide a memo on the outcome of the discussions when such occur. If such discussions did not occur, that would be what would be reported in the staff memo.
So this in no way will slow, if they can't get together in a room together and wrestle it out, I don't know what happens. If they can't get that done, they just proceed.
A direction that can be given by this council, or this committee or council, can only be given to staff. Staff can seek to implement it, but if a party determines not to proceed in discussions, that would not prevent the applicant from moving forward, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and looking at the applicant, are you satisfied with that? Okay, good. Thank you very much, and this was a good discussion. Thank you for trying to corral everybody, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. My comment just reiterates the frustration I expressed when we were dealing with another property adjacent to the farm, is that intensification along Carling was something that was very clearly communicated when the city debated the new official plan. At that point, the federal government did not come forward with concerns about the experimental farm. And now we're stuck on a piecemeal basis trying to sort of make policy on the go when there are no substantial federal protections for the farm right now. And so it comes down to, is half an hour of shadow too much or too little? And now we have competing statements from Agriculture Canada and from the expert hired by the city. And so that puts us in a really awkward position. And Agriculture Canada is not here today either. And I would like to note that too. And so it's very hard to gauge how much of a priority it really is for the federal government if they weren't here then and they aren't here now. I'm uncomfortable with the notion that we're being asked to approve something that has what seems like an expert challenge lodged against it. But there doesn't seem to be a perfect solution here. So I'm very inclined to support the motion in the direction that Councillor Brockington and Devine worked on together. I think it's the best we're going to get. But I don't know if there's any way to communicate up to the feds that they really need to come to the table to have a broader discussion about the farm. And if anyone from Agriculture Canada and from the federal government is listening, please do that. Because again, we are tasked with approving housing and we are tasked with solving our housing supply crisis. And I've learned so much about crop studies and shadow, but this is not the place to make those decisions necessarily. We need to know what the bounds are around the farm, because this is going to keep coming up again and again. So anyway, I want to thank Councillors Devine and Brockington for coming up with what I think is the most elegant solution we can find under the circumstances. But being asked to grapple with the impact on nationally significant research is not really the purview of this committee and leaves us in a very tough spot. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Corn heat units would be a great band name. Councillor Devine, Councillor Kavanaugh's put her hand up. Did you want to go last and do some wrap up? Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. No, I'm along the same vein as Councillor Troster. Have we heard from the federal government in regards to this file? Not Agriculture Canada, but from the federal government?
To you, Mr. Chair, the only comments I'm aware of receiving are the ones that were submitted and contained in the staff report by AFC.
Just by the agriculture?
Yep. I believe they're jointly submitted by NCC as well.
Yeah. No, thank you. I feel it's strange that a department has to defend itself, and pardon the pun, they should have gone up the food chain and gone to the federal government, because I'm perplexed at the pressure it's putting on us for approving more housing, which we know we're going to hear about more funding to get more houses built, and hopefully mostly affordable housing, but just the whole pressure versus these concerns. And if they defended their agriculture department, I think, and I'd like to know more about the private, I don't know if it was a private member's bill or if it was a government bill that is at second reading. Does anybody know anything about that? That could make a difference if it passed. I don't know. Leslie knows. So I think we need to know more about that as well. Is it possible we can be kept up to date on if that has an effect? I don't know if it'll be a cease and desist if it went through and got royal assent.
Mr. Chair, when I looked at that legislation, my recollection is it started to have debated second reading, I believe in 2022, and in June or so, and had not proceeded since that date. But certainly we can monitor it, Mr. Chair.
It's a government bill, it's not a...
So yes, I'm surprised that a government bill would not be proceeding, but yes, it's a government bill.
Okay, yeah, it'd be helpful to know, but I think that is just adds to the confusion if that is not the direction we're getting, because obviously we would follow that. Thank you.
I do not see any further questions from members for staff. I believe both Councillor Devine and Councillor Brockington would like to make some concluding remarks. Councillor Devine has his hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to my colleagues for the ongoing discussion. It's certainly been an educational one for me. I was quite taken by what I heard today from the former agricultural scientist. I think his name was David. And the thing that he said that's going to stick with me is that he's been thinking of his duties as a public servant. What's been concerning to me over this file, as well as the file at 1081 Carling, is that while I fully support our commitment as a council to address the needs for housing, it feels like our concern to address that matter has sometimes been without an equal concern of our duty as public servants to make the best decisions possible based on available evidence. I was also glad to hear that we had a farmer speak here today. In fact, someone from the National Union of Farmers, because we've often wondered if perhaps farmers have a less concern over this than the scientists. And that farmer spoke about her concerns that these developments will have on the impact of agricultural research. Scientists have been trying to dispassionately warn us about the possible long-term consequences of our decisions when it comes to developments that are going to impact the Central Experimental Farm, consequences to agricultural research, and therefore consequences to the future of Canadian agriculture. As the farmer said today, these are not abstract concerns. These can have real impacts on our ability to feed. I understand the colleague of my concerns, the concern of my colleagues that it'd be lovely if we had a framework with which to properly evaluate this. However, too often it has felt like we have dismissed or not taken into consideration the science behind these decisions before us. What I've tried to do in these current circumstances has been to advance the best available solution. With that, I do hope that you all support the motion and the direction brought by myself and Councillor Brockington. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Councillor Devine. Councillor Brockington, your hand's not up, but...
Thanks, Chair. Just very briefly, Central Experimental Farm is exclusively in River Ward. And if we were to park our emotional and sentimental feelings towards the farm, for those of us who went there as kids or have taken our kids or grandkids there, we have many happy, positive memories. But that said, there are planning files recently passed and present that we have to acknowledge and make decisions on. And we're asked to make decisions as members of this committee based on planning merits. Our job is to weigh the planning merits of files and make decisions. And I respect that. I have zero ill will towards the proponent or his consultant. I want to see this developed, and he deserves a timely decision by this committee and council. But in absence of strong federal protections, we're sort of getting a hot and cold presence from Agri-Food Canada. They have said clearly that what they do is very important for Canadians. And they said clearly that they're concerned that shadows will have impacts on their work. So we look to the federal government to take further decisions and actions to protect this federal land. This is federal land. And as a local city councillor and as a planning committee of the City of Ottawa, we have very limited tools in our toolkit to provide that. So federal government, we believe you when you say this is an important parcel of land in the heart of our city, and you do excellent work here. So step up and provide additional legislation or protections for this land. Chair, I don't know if this is going to set Councillor Tyrion off or not, but I think it would be helpful for this committee, given that we've established a working group, if staff could provide a brief memo explaining the legislation that is currently going through the federal government that implicates the farm. What I've heard from stakeholders is this does not and will not provide the protections that the farm needs. But given that we're not really engaged in that process, I would be open to receiving basically a summary of what this legislation is trying to accomplish and how it may or may not assist with the farm. Is that something that our staff could do?
We can certainly ask them to take that as direction. Would staff take that as direction?
That is the direction I'm empowered to accept, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. If I could just ask you to write that up and give it to Kelly at some point in the near future.
Fair enough. Okay. So, colleagues, I agree with many of you who said that housing and homelessness is a top priority, and I certainly want to do my part to facilitate that. But what's really caused me concern is in absence of true federal protections and or legislation for this property, is it, end of the day, on my shoulders or this committee's shoulders to reject all planning applications? That's not reasonable. The expectation is that we weigh it through the planning merits and make decisions, but that's why I felt uncomfortable to date, is because the federal government says, hey, it's important, but we're not going to put additional protections on that land. We look to the federal government to do just that. So, Chair, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. I don't see any further comments or questions from members of the committee. So we have a motion in front of us that would, from Councillor Brockington for Councillor Devine, that would give the developers some flexibility to increase the podium height, if that can potentially, and that might potentially reduce some of the tower height. Is that motion carried? Thank you. There is also the main motion now is amended. Does anyone want a voice vote, or is that carried? That is carried. Thank you very much, members of the committee. Thank you very much to members of staff. I know how much work this has been for you. To the applicants, to the members of the public, this has obviously been a very busy file, so thank you very much. Did you want to, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your dissent. So Councillor Brockington dissented on the motion as amended. The direction was taken by staff, and we're all comfortable and happy with that. Warm fuzzies. Is that not a procedural term? We'll give. I wear the sweater vest for a reason. It's warm and fuzzy. Not my longshoreman. So while members are leaving while staff are leaving the table, Kimberly Sabo is still with us on the matter of 16 Edgewater. I don't have a presentation. I'm assuming that members have read the planning report and are familiar with the item. So what I'd like to do, the applicant is here. Before we get to Kimberly, Jeffrey Kelly and Murray Chown from Novatech. If you'd like to, you can take 5 minutes to address the committee on this matter. We do have a delegation, yep. Hey, Jeff, it's like a phone call. Hey, Jeff, it's Jeff. He knows that.
How's it going,
He's looking
Jeff?
at the screen. Is it a G-off or Jeff? It's Jeff. Yeah. I don't want to.
Please comment, Chair, on G or J.
Yeah. Jeff, did you have any comments that you wanted to make, or does Murray?
Murray will not be joining us. If the committee would like to hear a presentation, can certainly do so in response to, particularly in response to community comments that we might be hearing after.
Okay, so what I'm going to suggest, I don't see members asking for that presentation. I'd like to hear from the public delegation, from Kimberly. And then after Kimberly's presentation and members have had an opportunity to ask questions of her, if members of the committee do have a question for the applicant, I'd be pleased to entertain those. So stay on the line, please, Jeff. Kimberly, welcome to Planning and Housing Committee. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Hello, sorry, when it popped up, my speech went away from my screen, so I'm trying to minimize it. Sorry, it'll just take a second.
Take your time,
Basically my comments, we already know, as everyone's already discussed, the official plan of Ottawa is to intensify development anywhere and everywhere. And we know this development is going to be pushed through no matter what shadowing, happens, and how the ramifications for the adjacent residential neighborhoods' enjoyment of property is. The main concerns now, since this is going to get pushed through, is this is a very aggressive rezoning from industrial to the general mixed use subzone 2, where the developer is jamming in as much as possible into a small plot of land with not, only one building that we sort of have to address the concerns of, let's say, a high rise. It's going to be a high rise, which is totally, out of character for residential neighborhoods, along with some mixed use commercial and residential. And also, I guess along the back that's going to butt up against the residential is a row of 7 townhouses. So, in the rezoning, it talks about setbacks and, 7.5 meters and whatnot. But for residents, I think the biggest concern, once you get past, you're not going to have a backyard, you're not going to have sun, you can't grow garden. It's really the concerns of when this development is going to be built. Previously, the developer had mentioned there wasn't going to be blasting, but now I see on the recommendations that there is a forthcoming report about blasting, and it's not mentioned in that future site control plan what exactly the conditions with respect to stormwater and blasting will be. So the problem is right now, the houses adjacent to the Edgewater development on Foolis have a unique design. So it's not like building next to a city high rise where you have a big strong core. All the houses that butt up to this development have walkout basements coming off of a slope. So we need to mitigate the risks if there's now going to be blasting, so it doesn't, break the foundations of the houses, cause more issues, to the actual structure of the houses. And that's not in the report. So I'd like to know if there's a timeline for the site plan so residents can, kind of see details on what's going to happen for the blasting, because I couldn't find anything online of what the city of Ottawa's rules as per blasting is. And the second main thing would be the potential flooding. As everyone knows, there was already, a big flood in the area. I think it was July 24, 2009. And the ramification of that type of flood, that was that 100-year flood, was that the storm water management of the city of Ottawa was not adequate, and the insurance companies were then suing the city. So we have the problem with the aging infrastructure. How is that going to affect things? Because already Foolis Crescent, it's overflowing and flooding as it is with limiters. And what happens when the water that runs down, from Foolis on the back of
501 Hazeldean into that grass area at the back, when it becomes concrete, what is the city going to do to mitigate the risks for the residents? Because the developer can do whatever on the land, but the developer isn't going to come to Foolis Crescent and fix the sewer limiters that are currently flooding. So those kind of things need to be addressed in that future site plan. And then the last sort of issue, you know, when looking at the details of the plan, because it's a very aggressive, intense plan with those 4 different buildings, is it seems to be there's a lack of potential parking, you know, for visitors. If people are coming to businesses, it looks like there's only 1 parking spot for 7, you know, townhouses. And where is that overflow going to go? It's going to go on to Edgewater, which is already double parked and stacked up and dangerous to walk along, even dangerous to drive along. So I'd like to see how the city would address issues. You know, putting a sidewalk from, let's say, the building of Edgewater to Hazeldean will help people walk to the corner, but that part really isn't the problem. The biggest part is walking down Edgewater. And if an overflow, you know, of visitors ends up on Edgewater, where is that backup, you know, of traffic that's already backing up onto Edgewater from Tim Hortons going to go if there's cars double parked? So those are basically, you know, the 3 issues I'd like someone to address possibly in more details, because, you know, a forthcoming plan doesn't really help you mitigate your risk of, are you going to move and sell your house before this development happens? So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sabo. I'll just note a couple of those questions are ones that are probably best addressed by the planner who'll be working on the site plan for this. They're a little outside the purview of this committee, which is with respect to blasting and stormwater management. With respect to parking, I can ask Allison to address that, but I see Councillor Curry has a question for you.
I was just going to simply say to the delegation, thank you, and I'll ask some of these questions, and you're answering some of them already. But I was also going to ask, just basically, was there a consultation on this where there was an opportunity to ask any of these questions, or these questions that have since come up?
Are you asking me or?
Yeah, I'm asking you. I mean, I think the councillor usually has.
We ask these questions, and this is, you know, the recommendation of the city, the report here, but they're not really addressed in the plan. Like in the recommendations that you guys have, I'm just, you know, I'm looking up, this is the response of what the city is going to do to the plan. You know, obviously they're pushing it through, and basically they just said, well, the stormwater is adequate capacity. Well, I would disagree with that if Foolis Crescent is flooding because there's a limiter in the sewer. So like, you know, where is the report? Can we see the report? Is that public? You know, and if it's a planner, can the planner provide it to us to see what risks there really are? You know, because just saying it's not going to be an issue doesn't really help as a resident to know what's kind of going on.
All right, thank you for that. We'll try to get some clarification. Thank you.
My urging to the planning department is to have a good conversation with Ms. Sabo and talk about the reports and the blasting plan and that sort of stuff. Is that something you can undertake, Allison?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Ms. Sabo, expect to hear in greater depth from the department with respect to answering some of your questions. The one question I do have on your behalf, Ms. Sabo, for the planning department is with respect to the parking and why there is the level of parking that is being proposed and why the department is recommending approving that.
I will answer that. Thank you for the question. There's been no request for a reduction in parking, so this development will meet the zoning bylaw for parking. There's no site-specific exception requested to address parking. So visitor parking, for example, will be 0.2 spaces per unit.
I wanted to ask Chair to staff to address another concern. I was glad to see there's a sidewalk that will be built from this site to Hazeldean Road, so that'll complete the pedestrian connection to Hazeldean. Was there an assessment of feasibility to build a sidewalk in the other direction to get to Terry Fox Drive?
The connections to the Main Street corridor were investigated. Although there are ditches there, sidewalk can be provided, and the applicant, through the site plan process, will be required to upgrade the sidewalk in front of the site and make a connection to Hazeltine. It was not examined going the other way. That would be something that would more fall to like a road upgrade at the cost of the city.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, just very quickly, the comments by the delegation are important ones because there was a significant flood. I know councillors around this table remember that. It was not a good time, that's for sure, a lot of years ago, but things have changed. But I just want a reassurances for the committee as well that when you move to site plan, all of these types of things will be looked at very carefully. I mean, I know that you're going to say yes, but I just want assurances when we hear these things from residents and that they are concerned and they are worried about things like this. The other is the blasting that, you know, in Canada North, it's nonstop and nothing like the Canadian Shield. But there are regulations for blasting, what is allowed, what isn't allowed, how properties are videoed ahead of time within a 150-meter radius and 75 from the actual site of blasting. So there are rules and regulations around that to protect residents. And so I just want assurances that all of that type of information would be available.
Yes, correct. So these are site plan matters as a condition of approval for future site plan, assuming one occurs on this property. There would be the requirement for the owner to undertake notification of the surrounding properties, take an inventory of the condition of their foundations, and notify them when blasting would occur. The city's condition basically follows the provincial protocol on blasting. And then your question about stormwater management, yes, so these, at a zoning stage, we're looking at whether there's adequate capacity in the system. We've resolved that yes, there is. At a site plan stage, we're looking more at the details of how it will be done and you know, what can be done with an apartment building, for example. There can be like a cistern in the underground or retention on the roof. There's all kinds of options that can occur. We will just, based on whatever is proposed, we will resolve the need for stormwater retention on the site at that time.
Great, thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you, Allison. Councillor Hubely, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've been listening all morning. I just want to clarify a few of the comments that have been made there. Yes, there was flooding in 2009 in parts of the ward. Not one report of flooding in the specific area that this application is about. The flooding took place elsewhere in the community. The flooding that I think the resident was referring to, because she's talking about the backflow valves that the city has installed in streets and probably every one of your wards. I know we have thousands of them across the city, and the messaging that we repeat every year since this was done in 2012 is that water on the street is a good thing, because the water on the street is the water that would have been in your basement if it wasn't for those backflow valves. So I get it that some people don't like puddles, but most people understand that that's water being kept out of their basement and that's very good for them. There was reference to the insurance companies suing the city. I'm not familiar with that. In fact, the city, myself and Alain Ganche and Eric Tousineau were the principals, met with the insurance industry from across Ontario, including all the adjusters and everything, because one of the things we were worried about at the time was the impact of that flooding on insurance rates. And we were able to reach a deal where the insurance companies understood that the $40 million worth of work that was done between 2012 and 2015 in that area to address the causes of the flooding would be enough that they would not need to raise the insurance rates, nor did they refuse anybody coverage for what we call it, sewer backup or whatever, because we had all that fixed. So I don't want to go over that whole thing. I'm happy to answer questions anybody wants it, but like I could talk for hours about this. This consumed 5 years of my life. So I'm more than happy to share that with more than just therapists. So, but the bottom line here is the work was done. There hasn't been a single house, knock on wood, there has not been a single house flooded since we did that work. And I thank the members of the previous council that supported getting all that work done. So that's one thing I want to address. The other part is the public consultation. I believe there was 2. I know there was 1 for sure, but I believe there was 2 that were held on this item. And yes, people had concerns, and I thought the applicant and staff addressed most of it, including the shadowing piece. As far as the parking goes, this is what you as a planning committee and we as a council have been saying we want. This is true affordable housing. It's the applicant can give more details about the income levels and everything. But the expectation is not everybody moving into these units is going to want parking. It's also on one of the best transit locations in my ward. It's one of the few areas where you can get transit 18 hours a day. Because most of the rest of the ward, the transit only works till 9:30 in the morning and then starts in the peak in the afternoon again. But here, you can get to a doctor, a bank, a grocery store, wherever you want to go from a bus that is mere steps away from this location. It's all they got to do is walk past the Tim Hortons and they're on the buses. So I think it's, and many other residents have expressed that this is the perfect location to try to do a significant affordable housing unit. I encourage you to take a look at the work that's being done here. I believe, Chair, I believe the proponent also has an application or a building already built in your ward as well. And I remember looking at that and thinking this was good work. So if you can confirm that, I'd appreciate it. But otherwise, I think those are the main points that was what was said. And I want to assure residents that there's no expectation that this is going to cause mass flooding or any issues like that, that the work will be done. There's lots of studies for the area, so we know the capacity of the system, and we can make this work. Because in closing, I agree with the rest of my colleagues, we have to get more affordable housing. So thank you.
Councillor Hubley, thank you very much. Councillor Hubley is supportive. Are there any further questions of staff? Is this item carried? Thank you. There are no in-camera items. Do we have any notices of motion? I don't think so. There are 2 inquiries. Councillor Brown, if you are still with us. I'm going to let Councillor Johnson go first, and then we'll come back to you, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 109 has put new constraints on public consultation, while larger scale development is set to increase with zoning regulations through the new official plan and zoning bylaw review. The City of Ottawa maintains a public notification system so that residents can receive updates on what development applications are coming to their neighborhoods. Question 1. What is the software or method used to build and maintain the public notification system and the content that is distributed? Number 2. How is this list kept up to date? Number 3. Who is eligible to be Who is eligible to register to be notified? Not perfect, sorry. Who is eligible to be to register to be notified through the public notification system? Who is ineligible? Number 4, what information would you receive when you are successfully registered for notifications through the public notification system? Is it based on geographic boundaries or tied to a specific application? Is it a permanent registration, or does it expire after a length of time? 5, when was the public notification and consultation policy that governs the public notification system last amended, and how? And 6, are there any current plans to update the public notification and consultation policy in response to the changes brought to the development application process at the city through Bill 109? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Brown, I now see your flag-framed face. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I apologize, I had an IT issue. My inquiry is on new developments, winter pathway maintenance. As part of any new development, it is common for new or existing pathways, sidewalks, and other active transportation infrastructure to be constructed or altered for the benefit of residents' use. Ideally, paths and sidewalks are winter maintained so that residents can make use of this infrastructure year-round. Unfortunately, some developments have proceeded without full consideration as to whether certain pathways and sidewalks can be safely winter maintained. With that in mind, number one, can the city indicate to the developer and respective ward councillor whether the proposed new or altered infrastructure will be able to be safely winter maintained as per the city's current policies? And number two, can this notification occur before final project approval? Mr. Chair, colleagues, I'm running into a few issues in some of the newer subdivisions in my ward where the city is taking ownership of some of these pathways that are well used by our residents. And when staff go in to maintain them for the first winter, we're finding that there are deficiencies that are prohibiting staff from being able to maintain them. And I just want to ensure that when we're building our communities, that we're being open and transparent with residents and the developers under clear guidelines as to what is a pathway or sidewalk that can be winter maintained, so we don't run into issues once the subdivision is taken over by the City of Ottawa and residents begin to use the pathways. Thank you, Chair.
Well raised. Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Those are the only inquiries I'm aware of. There is no other business. We're adjourned. The next meeting is Valentine's Day. See you soon.